Chapter 830. Tang En was the creator of the gray space, so he naturally knew everyone's fighting habit. He was an archer, a master of archery. With a bow in hand and a quiver on his back, he could suppress the enemy in an area. Of course, in order to achieve this effect, he had to find the best position to shoot from before he attacked. In other words, when the white-bearded old man's heart was pierced by an arrow, it meant that he had already found the right position. Sure enough, as Tang En strolled around, arrows flashed in the twilight sky from time to time, and sharp whistles sounded like blood-curdling cuckoos. Tang En didn't look at the sky. Even though he knew that every shriek represented the death of a deceased soul, he didn't have time to lament, because he had another mission to do. Excuse me. Tang En was currently at the back of the school, which hadn't been affected by the chaos in the front. So, as long as he saw a figure wandering around, he would beat him up and then capture him. Basically, he wouldn't be wrongly accused. Of course, if he wanted to ask for directions, he had to be more polite. So, looking at the knight on the ground, Tang En was very polite. "Where's Rhodes? Where's your mother?" These knights were different from ordinary clergymen. They had been through hundreds of battles and were extremely strong-willed. At the same time, they weren't afraid of vulgarities. Hearing this, they cursed without thinking. Tang En had a lot of methods to extort a confession, but time was of the essence, and he didn't have the patience to do so. So, when he heard this, he also broke the knight's throat without thinking and choked him to death. "Didn't your mother, your father, and your mother tell you to be polite?" Cursing was a skill. If you didn't want to be in a bad mood, the best thing to do was to kill the person first before cursing. That way, there wouldn't be a situation of arguing. Getting up, Tang En was in a good mood as he continued to look for his next target. He was here to kill, and before his target appeared, he didn't think about hiding his tracks. This way, other people would naturally be able to see him. Just as he turned into the corridor of a condominium building, he ran into a burly man with a gun who was rushing over from the opposite side. They looked at each other and sized each other up. "Who are you?" Tang En was still very polite. "Excuse me, Rode. Hey, don't be so impulsive. Perhaps you prefer another way of talking?" After several breaths of time, there was a miserable howl mixed with the sound of bones breaking. Tang En looked at the big man rolling on the ground and rubbed his nose. "I told you not to be impulsive. Where is Rode?" Pause for a while. "You don't want to say? Perhaps you prefer another way of questioning?" The burly man was sweating profusely as he pondered for a few seconds. Looking at Tang En, he sighed softly and stretched out his hand. In the end, he did not dare to try again. He groaned and said, "I don't know." Tang En nodded. "I believe you. Second question, where are you going in such a hurry?" The burly man subconsciously glanced at the sky to his right, then lowered his head and clenched his teeth, not saying a word. The reason why he answered earlier was not entirely because he was afraid of being forced to confess, but because he really did not know, so there was no harm in saying it. But the second question was different, so he did not say it. However, although his reaction was extremely fast, Tang En still saw his subconscious line of sight. Similarly, he turned his head to look at the sky to the right. There was the tallest building in sight. It looked like a tower, but also like an astrology platform. Tang En realized that Luke had chosen to shoot from that place. Clearly, the attack that had suddenly appeared behind him and was so sharp that the other party had attached great importance to it. Naturally, close combat was the best way to deal with an archer, which was why the knights had hurried over. Although he knew the other party's purpose, Tang En had no intention of saving him. The reason was very simple. If the other party could see the flaw, there was no reason why David and Harry couldn't see it. And if there were no experts, why would he need to go out of his way to save him? "Thank you." He stroked the burly man's heart in passing to end his pain. Tang En stood up again and walked forward. He could not help but frown. He realized that he seemed to have done something stupid. In such an environment, and with Rhodes' crazy personality, it was impossible for him to tell anyone his whereabouts, especially an ordinary night. Thus, if he continued searching like this, it would be very difficult for him to gain anything unless he ran into the other party by chance. But from another perspective, Tang En really did not have any good ideas. If the other party was a normal person, as the leader, he would naturally be sitting in the center and giving orders. But Rhodes was not a normal person. Tang En even suspected that Rhodes himself might not be able to fully understand his intentions. How could an outsider like him guess? He heaved a long sigh. Damn it, mental patients have a wide mind. They live up to their reputation. Encountering such an enemy gave Tang En a headache. No matter how strong he was and how exquisite his assassination skills were, if he could not even find the target, then the assassination would be impossible. At this moment, Tang En suddenly stopped and took a few steps back. He narrowed his eyes and looked through the windows of the building in front of him. He vaguely saw various lights shining inside. After thinking for a while, he shook his body and disappeared in an instant. Since the ordinary clergyman did not know, he could only find a senior clergyman to try. Sylvia was a little depressed now. Not because there were too many people chasing after her and it was too troublesome, but because she was depressed that she did not learn to hide in the past. Otherwise, she would not have met enemies no matter where she went. Moreover, after defeating one group, she would immediately run into another group. It was really annoying. Of course, Sylvia did not know that the people chasing after her were actually more depressed than her. After all, Sylvia was indeed famous. The Northern Temple had chased after her for so long and failed to succeed. They believed that it was unlikely that they could stop her here. However, Sylvia's behavior of running around was too much for them to bear. After all, the reason why the situation in the academy was now out of control was because of her contribution. What line of defense could withstand her fierce attacks? And once the line of defense was broken, the cavalry and the like would break in and tear the gap bigger and bigger, eventually causing the situation to become more chaotic. Those from the temple who stayed in the office building to conduct the overall command were now on the verge of tears. If they had a choice, they would use a luxurious carriage to open the way with flower petals and respectfully invite her out of the academy. Unfortunately, Sylvia did not know these things. She only knew that there were more and more people chasing after her, and she had to run around. She ran wildly, and her figure was reflected in the glass doors and windows in a flash. She ran upstairs and turned corners when she saw stairs. Sylvia's speed was not bad. Otherwise, she would not have been able to chase after Tang En for several months. It was not until the noise behind her gradually disappeared that Sylvia stopped at the corner of the third floor of an unknown building. She stretched out her hand to support herself against the wall and gasped for breath. She looked a little tired. After all, Sylvia was not made of iron. Naturally, she would be tired in such a dense battle. However, just after 3 breaths, a small group of figures suddenly appeared on the opposite side of the corridor. They stopped and looked at each other, anxiously shouting, "Here! She's here! Here they come again!" Sylvia pursed her lips expressionlessly. She suddenly jumped up and jumped over the railing of the corridor. Her body fell slightly, and then she tapped the railing on the second floor with her spear and flipped over. Second floor, she went to the second floor. Quick, stop her. She broke through the wall and is in the left corridor. She's gone. She's still on the third floor. Be careful behind you. The sound of walls collapsing, the sound of weapons colliding, and from time to time, terrified roars could be heard incessantly. This building that occupied a large area seemed to be trembling. It would not be surprising if it collapsed in the next moment. This was the super strength of the Knight's Flower. It was a strength that made people tremble. Continue to call people over. I want to surround and kill her. Under the building, Byron said coldly with a gloomy face. The middle-aged knight beside him frowned. Sir, we can surround and kill her. But the real enemy has already entered the academy. We don't have that much time to waste here. Moreover, this is not in line with the plan. Don't talk to me about some stupid plan. I only know that my enemy has already appeared. Byron pointed at the chaos on the third floor and waved his arms. His expression was ferocious. Now kill her. But Sir Rhodes, he rudely interrupted. Rhodes is not here, so I am the only one here who is Sir. Byron stood in front of the middle-aged knight. His eyes were glaring and his face was as cold as ice. Or, do you want to disobey the orders of your superior and be directly judged and killed by me here? After a moment of silence, the middle-aged knight turned his head and looked at the large group of knights that had just gathered. He waved his hand. Seal this place. Very good. Byron also turned his head and looked at the few excited bishops behind him. He narrowed his eyes. Let's go in and end her. Even if we can't complete the mission in the end, at least with the company of the Knight's Flower, we can rest in peace in the Garden of Repose. Chapter 831. Sylvia didn't know what Byron and the others were thinking. Even if she knew, she wouldn't care. Because she came here to prevent Byron and the others from resting in peace, and she didn't think they would enter the reclining garden. Because her spear would send them to the court of judgment, where they would be tortured by the soul evil fire, interrogated by their conscience, and finally fall into the abyss of hell. Of course, the prerequisite was to solve the problem at hand. With the addition of the Knights of Light and the Temple Mages, the three-story building was completely sealed off. No matter where they went, before they could even take a breath, they would be discovered and hunted down. But Sylvia was still fighting. She was a rare martial arts genius of the temple and a combat genius. As long as there weren't any void-level fighters, it would be difficult for her to be trapped in one area, no matter how many people there were. Especially when she started killing people. Sylvia didn't want to kill people, especially clergymen. This was one of the reasons why she would rather run around than fight back, but now she had to kill people. With a swing of her spear, several knights were sent flying while vomiting blood, their blood mixed with pieces of their organs. With a thrust of her spear, the temple mages hovering around the building had their shields broken, and they fell heavily to the ground, unable to get up for a long time. With another swing of her spear, the walls collapsed, and the ashes disappeared, drowning many figures. This was also the reason why the middle-aged knight hesitated. They didn't have that many people and time to waste here. And if they wanted to surround Sylvia, they first had to exhaust Sylvia's fighting spirit, and fight Sylvia's physical strength. Otherwise, everything would be wishful thinking. In other words, this was destined to be a bitter and long battle, but the actual situation was a little different. Not long after Byron and the others rushed into the building, Sylvia actually rushed into the leftmost room on the third floor. This was a place similar to a cubicle. It was very large, and there was only one door. Geographically speaking, it was a dead end. Of course, with Sylvia's strength, she could choose to break the wall and jump off the building, but now there were many mages floating outside. Even if they couldn't kill her, it shouldn't be a problem to seriously injure her. Therefore, no matter how one looked at it, this was clearly not a wise move. When Byron and the others saw this, they were naturally overjoyed. They only thought that Sylvia had lost her head from running and made such a low-level mistake. They quickly ordered people to seize control of the surrounding rooms. Soon after, they brought more than 10 high-level Do-Chi martial artists to break into the room. If they wanted to kill Sylvia in the shortest time possible, the result of blindly piling on people would be very poor. In the end, they still had to rely on high-level martial arts to determine the outcome. There was a brief confrontation in the room. "You're going to die here today." Byron pointed with his finger as he spoke in a flat and straightforward manner. His tone was calm, but it contained an unshakable certainty. "You can try." Holding her spear, Sylvia's tone was even more casual and calm. The two of them were no longer at peace with each other. After a short exchange of words, the battle erupted. With just the first collision, the roof of the room was crushed and broken open. Pure and holy light shot up into the sky, instantly piercing through the twilight night sky and shining brightly in the world. The battles within the academy, both near and far, could not help but pause for a moment. The head of the police force's fat face was immediately covered in sweat, and the order to advance was vaguely uttered between his trembling lips. When the two big shots saw this, their expressions were complicated. However, after a moment, they became resolute and fiercely waved their hands to attack. A little further away, Rod turned his head and squinted his eyes to look. After confirming that there was only holy Do-Chi within the radiance, he suddenly frowned and muttered something like "pig teammate," "crazy woman," and so on in a low voice. Then, without leaving a trace, he glanced behind him, and the corners of his mouth rose slightly. "Well, since the fish has already taken the bait, then it doesn't matter anymore." After a short pause, the battle continued. Sylvia's fighting style was also the same. Brandishing, stabbing, and smashing, not staining with fancy and exquisite. Just and simple, but also strong and overbearing. Just like the illustrious reputation of the Flower of Knights, the spear in Sylvia's hand was similarly well known by the world's martial artists. It was an indescribable awe. Generally speaking, familiarity also represented a flaw. Therefore, many clans and powers in the world would tightly cover their mental cultivation methods and secret fighting techniques, fearing that they would be known by others and be studied by others to find flaws. But this was useless in front of Sylvia. Everyone knew her method of using the spear, and they had even practiced it before because it was simply an entry-level spear technique. But it was precisely this entry-level spear technique that was proficient to the extreme, and used to the peak, that was enough to amaze the world and cause many evil heretical experts to die under her spear. The current battle situation was also like this. Even if she was in a desperate situation, even if there were more than 10 martial artists joining hands to violently attack, even if there were magic attacks from time to time, Sylvia was still strong, strong beyond reason. A spear calmly came and went in the field, unhindered, and unexpectedly suppressed everyone like this, causing them to be unable to help but be dumbfounded, and even be convinced. But even so, Byron still smiled, and his smile was very proud. He was very confident in one point, and that was that the stronger Sylvia's performance, the closer she was to death. Because in the end, humans were not gods, and human strength was ultimately limited. Sylvia also smiled, but it was a very shallow smile, and the corners of her mouth were slightly pursed. How could someone like her, who had experienced hundreds of battles, not know that this place was not suitable for battle? How could she make such a low-level mistake? Of course, she knew that there was a limit to human strength, so she did not choose to continue fighting in all directions, and instead entered this place. Because she was very clear that only by entering this place would Byron and the others, who thought that they had seen the light at the end of the tunnel, muster up their courage and impatiently approach. What she needed to do was to find a suitable opportunity to capture the other party, and then the crisis before her eyes would be resolved. Very simple, wasn't it? Sylvia had always thought that the world's affairs were simple, but some smart people always like to make things complicated, as if they did not do so, they would not be able to show their intelligence. And regarding this kind of intelligence, Sylvia's way of dealing with it was always simple. A spear smash, and the clouds would clear up. Now, Sylvia wanted to smash this spear, because she had already found a suitable opportunity. Everyone present believed that she would definitely die, so under the tyrannical spear light, everyone involuntarily chose to retreat. Because they only wanted to exhaust her to death, and not to perish together with her. And under this kind of situation, the tyrannical spear light would inevitably create an opening. Of course, if she first showed weakness, and then suddenly launched a surprise attack to capture Byron and the others, the effect would be better, and it would also save more effort. Thinking about it, if that wretched guy was here, he would definitely choose to use this method. But she was Sylvia, and even if she wanted to use a scheme, she would use the powerful and tyrannical Sylvia. Suddenly thinking of that wretched guy, Sylvia's mouth could not help but reveal a faint smile, and then she shook her head. Narrowing her eyes, she suddenly stepped forward, and a desperate aura instantly engulfed the entire place. The blazing flames on the spear wantonly surged, as if it was the fire of karma that could burn the world. Its might was terrifying, but in the next moment, this perfect spear that contained Sylvia's essence, energy, and spirit stopped in midair. Pursing her lips, Sylvia looked at the smashed door not far away, and suddenly wanted to rub her eyes, because she did not dare to believe her own eyes. The wretched guy that she had just thought of had actually appeared now? Sylvia's sudden outburst frightened the surrounding people, and when they were about to subconsciously dodge, they suddenly saw that the tyrannical spear did not fall, and they were even more confused. Then, following Sylvia's line of sight, they also saw the person standing by the door. In this operation to encircle and kill Sylvia, those who were qualified to participate were of course experts. As for those ordinary knights of light, they retreated a little bit, guarding the surroundings, to prevent Sylvia from suddenly breaking out, and also to prevent external factors from disturbing. But now there was a youth that suddenly appeared at the door. No one knew how he came in, but he was obviously not a person from the temple. The youth's appearance was ordinary, and his actions were ordinary, as if he had come to visit a good friend, casually holding on to the door frame, and as if he had unintentionally interrupted the master's business. His expression was a little surprised, and a little embarrassed. The room was silent. Of course, Tang En was surprised. He just saw that there was a flash of fighting aura, and wanted to catch a senior clergyman to ask, but he did not expect to meet Sylvia here. He paused, touched his nose, and waved his hand. "Hi, we meet again." Coming back to her senses, Sylvia stared at Tang En, and there was some annoyance between her eyebrows. Anyone who was interrupted at the most crucial moment of their plan would not be in a good mood. Seeing this, Tang En was surprised, but did not think much, and only secretly muttered, "Why is this woman so angry?" and still did not give a good face. He hesitated, but still put on a hypocritical smile. I really did not expect to meet you here, but it is also a good thing. We are all familiar with each other. Asking you for a small favor will not be a problem." Pause for a while, pointed at Byron, who was not far away, with a look of a merchant. How about you give me someone? It was to give, and not to ask. It was like two generations of neighbors. One of them cooked a plate of meat at home, and the other came in with a bowl of rice and casually said, "How about, give me some?" This contemptuous attitude, which could not be concealed, and did not try to conceal, instantly angered the warriors present. But Byron, who was pointed at, did not get angry. He just stared at Tang En's ordinary face, and only felt that it was very familiar. Sylvia looked at Tang En's finger, looked at Byron, and shook her head with a firm look. No. This time, in addition to killing Road, she came to capture at least one bishop alive. And among these bishops, Byron was undoubtedly the one she wanted to capture the most. Oh! Tang En scratched his head, did not insist, and moved his finger to another bishop in a dark red robe. What about him? Still very unscrupulous, but this time his attitude changed a little, like a farmer who entered someone else's vegetable garden, first picked a big radish in the field, but the owner did not agree, so he took a fancy to a cabbage. After a little hesitation, Sylvia did not refuse this time, but also did not explicitly agree. She took a few steps to the side, leaving a space, and looked up at Tang En. Her attitude was very clear. "I gathered all the people here. You want to share? Okay, but you have to pay a price." Tang En understood her meaning, thought for a while, and turned to look at the red-robed bishop behind the crowd. "I heard that the temple advocates dedication and sacrifice. Well, you come with me, and I'll pretend that I never came. How about that?" After a pause, seeing the other party's mocking eyes and disdainful head, he could not help but helplessly walk to the center of the field, sighing softly, "Alas, how should I say? Actually, I've always been a person who advocates peaceful solutions." Chapter 832. Actually, I've always been a person who advocates peaceful solutions. Sylvia's mouth twitched when she heard this. She thought of the 10 bishops' heads that had been taken away in one night, as well as the believers rioting, the bounty hunters rebelling, and the clergy suffering heavy casualties. The situation was extremely chaotic. She turned her head away and pretended not to hear anything. At this moment, a shrill scream suddenly rang out. "Tang Yin! You're Twain!" Byron's face was full of shock as he pointed at Twain, his aged body trembling uncontrollably. In the northern temple, Byron had only seen Tang Yin's disguised appearance. It was only after Tang Yin had taken the Eye of Disaster and caused a huge commotion that Byron saw the wanted poster that he remembered Tang Yin's true appearance. However, Tang Yin's appearance was too ordinary, so Byron hesitated for a moment before he blurted out the familiar name that had been in his throat several times. Tang Yin wasn't surprised, but the temple experts blocking the perimeter were surprised. They hadn't expected that the target of this mission would appear in front of them. Some of them reacted quickly and roared as they stepped forward, their spears piercing forward like lightning. Their target was naturally Tang Yin's heart because it contained the will of purification. Before the spear arrived, the wind was already there. Tang Yin's expression didn't change, and he didn't dodge. He just looked at his clothes sticking to his left chest and frowned slightly as if he remembered something. The next moment, with a whoosh, the spear accurately hit the target. Everyone was stunned at first, then they were overjoyed. It was a success. At this moment, a voice suddenly rang out behind them. "Since you remember, shouldn't you first return the 2,000,000 gold coins to me?" There was no blood on the tip of the spear, and the pierced figure was gradually fading. He suddenly turned around. At some point, Tang Yin had already arrived at the empty spot next to Sylvia. He didn't pay any attention to them and just looked at Byron seriously. His tone was still unscrupulous. "Don't say that you've forgotten. When we first met in that side hall, you personally put those 2 bundles of gold notes into your sleeve. 2,000,000 gold coins was not a small sum. In fact, even with the authority of a bishop, he would not be able to covet so much in his entire life." Byron's face darkened when he sensed the gazes around him. He pretended that he hadn't heard those words. He stared at Sylvia and shouted, "You actually cooperated with such a great enemy of the temple. You have indeed degenerated into an evil heretic." Sylvia was silent. After a moment, she raised her head. Her eyes were firm and calm as before. "To resist foreign aggression, we must first settle our internal affairs." Tang Yin was stunned. Then, he clapped his hands and said with a smile, this sentence, "Well, it's very good and very powerful." Sylvia naturally didn't understand the complex meaning in Tang Yin's words. She looked at Byron and the others, brandishing her spear and stepping forward, and then said resolutely, "The Puritans have already come to the north. No one can protect you this time. I will do my best to send all of you to the main tribunal to receive the punishment of God." The corners of Byron's eyes twitched, but he suppressed his somewhat panicked expression and waved his hand. "As long as I kill you, who can judge me? Do it." "Wait." Tang Yin hurriedly pressed his hand down and looked around at the restless temple experts. "Is Razor here?" Everyone was silent. Tang Yin turned to Sylvia. Of course, Xia Weian understood what Twain meant. Previously, it was precisely because Razor had led a team to ambush a former bounty hunter branch guild that Twain had suddenly gone crazy. This had also directly led to the current situation in the Temple of Light that was out of control. No, he didn't come this time either. That's a pity. Tang Yin shook his head gently, his face full of regret. Then, he narrowed his eyes and said, "Let's do it as usual. Let's end this quickly. The so-called, as usual, naturally referred to the tacit cooperation between the two of them in the Northern Temple headquarters. Byron nodded. Okay. As soon as he said that, Sylvia stepped forward and brandished her spear. Blazing flames shone on the spot again. She didn't need to look at who was in front of her because she believed in her own strength. She also didn't need to consider the surrounding attacks because she believed in Tang En's ability. Therefore, Xia Weian had no qualms about smashing out with her heavy spear. This battle was different from the previous one. There were more people this time, and with the internal and external blockades, the lineup was more luxurious than the previous one. However, in reality, their strength alone was not as good as Owen's and the others. Moreover, because of the disparity in strength, their coordination was not good enough. Therefore, their actual combat strength was not even as good as the previous one. It was precisely because of this that Tang En said to end this quickly. He had such confidence. This confidence came from himself, and also from Sylvia. Although the two of them stood on different sides and had quite a bit of enmity between them, they were a perfect match for each other. But once they joined forces, they were the most suitable partners, and the battle prowess they could display was even more terrifying. Soon, this terror was sensed by the dozen or so temple experts around them. The attacks could not even get close before they were neutralized by the blood-red blade. Defense. At this moment, the overbearing spear pressed down and barely managed to parry. The next moment, although inconspicuous, the blood-red blade danced around the vital part of the neck, pressure. The pressure was omnipresent, and even breathing was extremely difficult. The battle was completely one-sided. Although it was almost the same before, that was because they didn't want to die together with Sylvia, so they avoided the overbearing spear with reservation. But now, each of them was fighting desperately, and they had no choice but to fight desperately. They were still suppressed by a spear and a dagger, and they had no temper at all. Yo, I haven't seen you for a few days, and your strength has improved a lot. Casually swatting away a few attacks, Tang En squinted at the flame spear that was even more powerful, and could not help but praise. If this continues, it won't be long before you can successfully advance to the void level. TSK, what a pervert! Xia Weian didn't even turn her head. She looked at the defensive spear net formed by the pale-faced masters of the Divine Hall and waved her spear expressionlessly. You've improved a lot. I can't see through you now. With a boom, the sacred Do Chi of the same origin twisted and fought, and the winner was decided in an instant. The spear net collapsed, and the blazing flames danced enchantingly, like a proud peony that was beautiful and outshone the other flowers. Haha, don't compare me. The laughter came from behind, but before the words fell, Tang En's figure had already arrived in front of Sylvia, and the blood-red blade flashed like a needle. The temple experts who had just broken through the spear net defense could only watch the blood blade approach them. Bang bang bang! Several bloody figures flew out like cannonballs, smashing through the outer wall of the house, spraying a large amount of blood mist in the air, and fell down from the third floor. It seemed that they would not be able to stand up again in a short time. At this time, the last sentence slowly spread out. I'm already so perverted that no one loves me. This was not the hypocrisy of self-flattery. Excessive modesty was hypocrisy. Tang En knew that it was not an exaggeration to say that the speed of his growth was shocking. If it was in front of others, he would not mind making jokes and avoiding talking about it. But in front of Sylvia, he would not do so. The specific reason was more complicated. Perhaps it was because males could not help but show off their beautiful feathers in front of females who were related to them. Or maybe he just simply wanted to say it. Who could say for sure? Of course, what could be confirmed was that when they saw Tang En and Sylvia destroying their meditation formation while chatting and laughing, Byron and the others panicked. In fact, with their strength as great mages, it was impossible for them to lose so miserably. But the reality was that they had magic but did not know how to use it properly. They could only stand at the side and worry. The more they helped, the more chaotic they became, the more panicked they became. In short, they had forgotten how to fight. After a while, the middle-aged knight retreated from the battle circle. Looking at the frightened expressions of Byron and the others, he secretly shook his head and sighed. Suppressing the injuries on his body, he stepped forward and said, "Sir, we can still hold on for a while. You should retreat first." "Retreat? Okay, where should we retreat to?" Byron and the others did not care about being polite at this time and asked anxiously. "Leave this building. Sir, you can fly at will. They can't stop you." Byron and the others' eyes suddenly lit up. Yes, if they could not win, they could at least hide. They were great mages and could fly high. And as long as the other party did not break through to the void level, they could not do anything to them. Thinking of this, they hurriedly turned and ran to the door. The middle-aged knight stood in place and looked at the back of the few people running away. He could not help but think of the words that rode off and said and muttered sarcastically, "What a group of pig teammates!" While shaking his head, a black shadow suddenly flashed by and chased after him. At the same time, a joke surrounded him. "I basically agree with your point of view, but don't insult pigs. Be careful." Chapter 833. The night was filled with chaos. The one-sided battle was not only happening in the cubicle on the third floor, but also in the southeast corner of the academy. The center of the battlefield was in the middle of the academy, where the reinforcement forces from the city had already broken through and were fighting with the people from the temple. Parts of the battlefield had already infiltrated the back of the academy, but this was just the beginning. Therefore, the southeast corner seemed to have been forgotten. It was pitch black and quiet, with no one in sight. After that, a bang resounded as a low wall suddenly exploded apart from within, and it broke the silence here. Then, a majestic figure quickly passed through the dust and rubble, landing on the ground and rolling. Without waiting for the force to dissipate, he bounced up again and ran wildly. Although this series of movements was slightly embarrassing, he did not waste any time. More importantly, if one looked closely, that figure was not majestic at all. It was clearly two people, a silver-masked man grabbing the other figure and running wildly. Under such circumstances, to be able to maintain such a terrifying speed and such standard movements, this silver-masked man's skills could not be said to be not terrifying. But he was still running in a sorry state. The sweat on his forehead slowly slid down the ice-cold mask, and there were traces of anxiety hidden in the depths of his indifferent eyes. Although he did not look back, he did not dare to be negligent, as if there was a terrifying giant beast chasing after him in the dark night. Just as the two of them left the perimeter of the wall, suddenly boom! Rubble flew everywhere, dust rose up again, and there was a faint flicker of gold and silver light. The wall, which was several feet thick, seemed to be piled up with flour, instantly fell apart and was crushed into slag. Then, a figure carrying a sword appeared in the dust. "Although you didn't give me a big surprise, you were able to run here while carrying a burden. Your speed is indeed not as simple as the rumors say. But I say, there's no need to continue running, right? Haha, deliberately showing weakness and deliberately slowing down. Isn't it all to fight me alone? The environment here is not bad. No one will disturb you. It is the best battlefield." His tone was confident, but the silver-masked man in front of him did not seem to hear him. He did not slow down, but there was a bitter smile at the corner of his mouth. King got the wrong person, still running? Interesting. I have a friend you must know, his name is Carl. That's right, it's the bloody butcher who died in your hands. Maybe it's because we have similar working styles, so I get along quite well with him. Oh, don't misunderstand, I'm not here to avenge him, that would be too boring. Of course, I should thank him. He was the one who gave me the idea to invite you here. Actually, I've heard of you long ago. It's just that I've always stayed in the South and didn't have the chance to interact with you. How should I put it? I think we're the same type of people, whether it's in terms of personality or style. As for positions and whatnot, it was too boring. Only a mediocre person would fuss about it. I have a good relationship with Carl, so I can naturally become friends with you. Unfortunately, the timing of our meeting this time is really too unfortunate. But it's also good. Since I have a similar friend, it should feel good to have a similar enemy. Pause for a while. You must know me, but I think it's necessary for me to formally introduce myself at such a wonderful moment. Mr. Tang En, nice to meet you. I'm Luoda, you can call me Luoda. Sensing Raymond's surprised gaze, the silver-masked man remained calm. Luoda, I don't know you. You've got the wrong person, and… Nice to meet you. The silver-masked man, who was also Michaud, had nothing to say. Michaud's words were faint, but there was a hint of madness in them. What else could he say when he met a lunatic? He only felt a little regret. It was true that he followed Luoda to find out where Raymond was imprisoned, but he should have been more careful. Otherwise, he wouldn't have fallen into this lunatic's trap. Before he had time to think about it, there was a sudden burst of light behind him, and several sharp sword rays pierced through the air. Although they didn't reach him, the sharp sword rays caused him to feel a sharp pain on his back. Without any hesitation, Michaud stepped on the ground and quickly jumped to the side. Swoosh! 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 The golden and silver sword rays brushed past him, causing Raymond's face to turn pale. Michaud's expression didn't change, but he knew that he had lost the chance to escape. These sword rays were not meant to hurt him, but to seal off the surrounding area. Go! As soon as he landed, he let go of Raymond and rolled to the side. Michaud stood up and spun around like a ghost. In an instant, a storm of sword rays shot towards Rode. Ha ha! Good one! Rode laughed as if he didn't see the sharp sword rays. He stepped forward and slashed down with his sword. The great sword was naturally longer than the dagger, so Michaud had no choice but to rush to Rode's side and slash at Rode's neck. You're fast, but not fast enough. As if he had expected this, Rode turned the hilt of his sword and was about to block the attack. But in the next moment the great sword suddenly stopped, and the sword rays disappeared. Instead, they were replaced by countless flashing green light. It was still a frontal attack, and the sword rays were still dense. But this time, it was no longer restricted by the distance as it closed in on him. More importantly, the sword rays were no longer scattered randomly. Instead, they were concentrated and rotated in a regular pattern, like the evening wind blowing the evening fragrance, quietly and wantonly blooming. Each of the seemingly weak green petals revealed a trace of fatal aura. If Tang En were here, he would definitely recognize this dreamy and dangerous attack. It was the system's random flower skill. He had taught it to the members of the gray space, but there were not many people who could fully comprehend it and actually use it. Michaud was naturally the best among the few who could. It should be said that Michaud's random flower skill was no longer purely the system's random flower skill. It was less imposing and more ghostly. This change was not right or wrong, but it was more suitable for Michaud. Of course, what was suitable was naturally good. Huh. Interesting. Rode's eyes lit up. He was a little excited when he saw this. Most of the other world's martial arts were grand, but very few were exquisite. Among them, the most famous was the court's sword skills. However, in the eyes of an expert like Rode, blindly pursuing exquisite court sword techniques had already fallen into a disadvantageous position. It was just for the sake of looking good, and its actual combat strength wasn't worth mentioning. On the other hand, although Michaud's attack was also exquisite, it didn't lack a hint of murderous intent. Rode was delighted and couldn't help but feel his hands itching. Licking his lips, Rode narrowed his eyes and clenched the hilt of his sword. He was not in a hurry to do something as elegant as swinging his sword. This was because he felt that although the martial skill in front of him was not bad, the do-chi that was added to it was still a little weak. It was not able to display its full power. He was waiting for a change to come. But then, the sword rays accelerated and approached him. Road frowned and the golden and silver combat energy exploded in an instant. He raised his sword to meet the attack. With a loud bang, Michaud's body was sent flying. His chest felt like it was hit by a huge hammer. The sound of bones breaking could be clearly heard. Michaud opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood. His body glided more than 10 feet in the air and finally crashed into a stone building. He broke through the wall and felt an even greater pain from his back. Michaud's eyes dimmed. He struggled to stand up. His right hand was holding the deformed short sword tightly. Unfortunately, his combat energy was still too weak. In the distance, Road did not chase after him. Instead, he took a few steps back and stood there in a daze. First, he looked down at his broken shirt, then slowly raised his hand to touch his cheek. When he opened his hand, blood dripped from his fingers. He clenched his fist, and his monstrous anger continued to gather. Road had never lacked confidence in his own strength, but he was definitely not arrogant. Not long ago, he fought with Sylvia. He knew that he could not defeat her easily. Tang En had been chased by Sylvia for several months. He fought thousands of miles in the northern wilderness and still managed to escape unscathed. How could he be sent flying dozens of feet away by his sword? If so, there was only one possibility. Suddenly, Michaud looked up. Although the twilight was dark, he could still see the uncontrollable killing intent in Road's eyes. "You are not Tang En, idiot?" Michaud sneered as he walked out of the hole in the wall. "What an idiot!" "Good." Road nodded and raised his sword expressionlessly. "In that case, it's time for you to die." Chapter 834. In the third-floor compartment, he roared, "Be careful!" Seeing Tang En appear behind the bishop like a ghost, the middle-aged knight's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He couldn't understand how the other party came out of the battle aura, and it seemed that he was the first to know. Were his companions in the battle circle all blind? In fact, they weren't blind, but they were definitely seeing things. The experts of the Temple of Light who surrounded them could only barely resist. How could they spare the energy to see where the ghostly Tang En was? And even if they did see, with Tang En's speed, they wouldn't be able to stop him, and could only watch. "Break!" With a light shout, Tang En's right arm swung down at a speed that seemed slow but was actually fast. The black dagger pierced through the red-robed bishop's magic shield. Tang En pressed the dagger down unreasonably and smoothly cut the magic shield into 2 halves, as if he was cutting cloth. Then, he reached out his left arm and directly grabbed the red-robed bishop out of the shield. With a scream, the red-robed bishop was like a baby bird that was taken out of its nest, screaming in horror, "Help! Don't kill me!" Byron and the others in front didn't dare to turn back to help, but the great fear seemed to have frozen their legs, making them tremble and unable to escape. This was the cowardly reaction of someone who lived like a prince when encountering danger. Seeing this, Tang En shook his head slightly, and a strange feeling of an adult bullying a child arose in his heart. He took a step forward, and the dagger was out again. This time the target was Byron. But at this moment, whoosh, a sharp wind suddenly came from behind him. Tang En sidestepped, and a spear of battle aura quickly passed through the place where he was previously standing. It was the middle-aged knight. Because he couldn't help in time, he actually threw the spear. Tang En dodged, and the spear's target naturally changed to Byron in front of him. It seemed that they were going to kill each other, but Tang En frowned in surprise. With a bang, the spear of battle aura directly hit the magic shield, and it immediately rippled. Byron screamed as he was sent flying by this force. He smashed into the wall and fell down in an instant. Tang En didn't expect such a sudden change of events. When he came back to his senses, He couldn't help but turn to look at the middle-aged knight and give him a thumbs up. Although Byron had fallen from the third floor, his magic shield hadn't been damaged, so he naturally wouldn't die. On the contrary, he was able to escape successfully because of the spear. This was also the strength of martial artists who had experienced hundreds of battles. Perhaps their strength was not as good, but in a real battle, they were much more difficult to deal with than those rookie masters. The middle-aged knight obviously didn't feel Tang Yin's admiration. Seeing that his quick wit had worked, he immediately pointed at Tang Yin and shouted, "Ignore Sylvia, attack him." It had to be said that this was indeed a wise decision. Sylvia was strong, but she didn't have the ability to decide the outcome of the battle in an instant. However, Tang Yin was different. Judging from his previous terrifying speed, he was undoubtedly more of a threat since he could come and go as he pleased. Tang Yin looked at the dozen or so powerhouses from the Temple of Light who were rushing towards him. After thinking for a while, he no longer cared about the bishops who were scrambling to escape. He grabbed the red-robed bishop in his hand and rushed towards the crowd, forming an encirclement with Sylvia who was rushing towards him. The two of them encircled more than 10 people. This action was undoubtedly a bit absurd. However, with Tang Yin moving like the wind, it became a reality. The middle-aged knight at the periphery looked at his companions who were struggling and falling to the ground from time to time. The corners of his eyes twitched, and his eyes were filled with pain. However, he still ran away with large strides and escorted the few bishops who were still in shock out of the room. This was actually a matter of choice. From the middle-aged knight's point of view, this encirclement was a complete failure. What they should consider now was how to preserve their strength and retreat as soon as possible. The bishops were undoubtedly more important than his companions, so he ordered these people to attack Tang Yin hopelessly. However, from Tang Yin's point of view, these bishops were a bunch of rookies. It would not be a problem to kill them at any time. In comparison, it was more important to kill these powerhouses who were in actual combat in front of him. Without support, these dozen or so powerhouses would naturally not be able to hold on for long. Tang Yin was ruthless and did not leave any survivors under his dagger. Sylvia, seeing that the situation was settled, could not bear to see them die. She rushed to brandish her spear and pushed some of the severely injured warriors out of the building, sparing their lives, until there was only one warrior left in the room who was barely standing. "Enough, Tang Yin, he's already crippled. Haha, don't forget that you owe me another favor." After confirming that the warrior who was covered in cuts and bruises no longer had the strength to fight, Tang Yin naturally did not mind doing Sylvia a favor. He withdrew the dagger from the warrior's neck, patted his shoulder, and looked at the wall which was full of holes not far away. "You know what to do, right?" The warrior swallowed the blood in his mouth and nodded silently. He then looked at Sylvia, hesitated for a moment, and said in a low voice, "Thank you." He staggered to the front of the wall and jumped down, causing the ordinary knights who were retreating below to exclaim in shock. Turning his head, Tang Yin looked at the red-robed bishop in his hand and curled his lip. "All right, those who should leave have left. It's time to entertain you. Save me. Head Commander Sylvia, save me." Even an ant craved for life, let alone a high-ranking red-robed bishop. Seeing that the severely injured warrior had escaped with his life, his heart was suddenly filled with hope. He looked at Sylvia with pleading eyes, completely forgetting that not long ago, he had said that Sylvia was an evil heresy. Sylvia heard him and lowered her eyes. She was speechless. She had fallen into such a situation. It would be a lie if she said that she did not hate these bishops. However, the reason why she did not speak was because she knew that it would be useless even if she spoke. This was because she had made an agreement with Tang Yin before. This was no longer a simple matter of gratitude. Bang! With a wave of his hand, the red-robed bishop fell to the ground. Tang Yin bent down and looked a little uncomfortable. "Damn, you have no sense at all. Don't you know that your life is now in my hands? You even asked someone else to help you. Why not me? You are obviously looking down on me. No, no, no. No, don't hit me. Holding his head, the red-robed bishop's lips trembled, but he could not say anything else. It was not that he did not want to beg for mercy, but the key point was that begging Tang En would not work. Forget it. I have always respected the old and loved the young. The rest depends on your performance. Tang En waved his hand generously and asked, Where is Road? I don't know, Tang En's face suddenly changed. He turned his hand and flashed a dagger. He said gloomily, So you are no longer of any use. I know, I remember now, I really remember now. Tang En stared at the red-robed bishop's frightened old face for a few seconds, then raised his hand and patted it. Little girl, even you know to keep a calm face when lying. It seems that you really don't know. Don't ask, it's useless. Sylvia walked over with her gun. Road is the person in charge of this operation. They are just appendages who came along. They have no right, and no one will specifically tell them where to go. Tang En looked up and frowned. What do you suggest? It's very simple. Let him come to you. Pause for a while. I came here this time to kill Road, but no matter what kind of chaos I create, Road will not come to me. But you are different. As long as you make enough noise, such as attacking their command center, Road will definitely come to you. Tang En was stunned when he heard this. He then patted his head and secretly scolded himself for being stupid. Road came to kill him this time, so as long as he stood out, Road would of course take the initiative to come to him. Wasn't this much better than looking for him everywhere? Then he thought of something and raised his eyebrows. He looked at Sylvia and said with a smile, The direction Byron and the others are retreating to is the command center, right? Sylvia did not deny it. We each take what we need. There's no conflict, right? Tang En needed to find Road, and Sylvia needed to capture Byron. At least for now, it seemed that there was no conflict between them. And destroying the command center was also a good thing for Tang En. He got up and picked up a spear on the ground. Deal. Lead the way. Sylvia nodded and stepped out of the door. Tang En followed and quickly disappeared outside the door. Both of them seemed to have forgotten something. The red-robed bishop lay on the ground in a daze. After making sure that the footsteps were getting farther and farther away, he could not help but look ecstatic. He quickly got up from the ground with a vicious expression, secretly thinking about how to return the humiliation he had just suffered 100-fold. At this moment, suddenly, whoosh! A black shadow suddenly shot out from outside the hole in the wall. The red-robed bishop felt a sharp pain in his chest. His body flew a few meters in the air and was directly nailed to the inner wall. He looked down. It was a spear. Giving you hope does not mean letting you live, but to make you feel despair again. Chapter 835. Under the dim light of dusk, the man raised his sword and said, In that case, it's time for you to die. Before he could finish his sentence, Road suddenly looked up and saw a cold, killing intent in front of his eyes. In a flash, he pulled back his sword and held it in front of his forehead. With a loud clang, the killing intent that collided with the sword was revealed. It was a pure iron arrow with a metallic luster. In the next moment, the arrow completely shattered into iron shavings and scattered with the wind. Road took a step back and felt a slight numbness in his hand. He narrowed his eyes and nodded. Interesting, to be able to use a pure iron arrow, one would need an excellent bow. To be able to shoot an iron arrow, one would need a great deal of strength. To be able to shoot accurately from a distance, one would need superb archery. Combining these three factors, the archer in the dark would naturally be interesting. Road put down his sword and looked to the right. In the shadow of a small building 100 meters away, a figure holding a bow walked out, followed by more than 10 figures. The first person waved his sword at Michaud and laughed. "Ha ha, brother, do you need help?" Michaud looked at the familiar faces and smiled. Of course I do, he said calmly. Of course I do. But I don't think you can help. This is road. You should run. Haha, we have to fight before we think about running. Besides, the man with the sword pointed at the faint noise behind him and shrugged helplessly. In fact, we are running. This was the truth. Luke's arrow was too sharp. In a short time, the people in the temple behind the school fell into chaos. After all, no one wanted to be killed by arrows flying from the dark for no reason in the middle of a battle. Therefore, many people immediately went over to attack. David and the others, who were responsible for protecting Luke, were able to resist for a while at first. But as more and more people gathered, they decisively abandoned that place and broke out of the encirclement. Never would he have thought that he would run into Michaud, who was in imminent danger. Michaud narrowed his eyes and took a deep breath. So, you're here to drag me down? He asked helplessly. Haha, you can't say that. As the saying goes, we should face difficulties together. David and the others stepped out of the shadows and spread out to surround Rode. Rode didn't care and still stood in place. He turned his head to look at David and the others' attire and raised his eyebrows. Gray space? Yo, I didn't expect us to be so famous. David slowed down his footsteps and cautiously walked close to the ground. However, on the surface, he still had a carefree appearance. Haha, it really is you guys. Since the gray space had come, then Twain must have come as well. The anger from being teased instantly dissipated, and Rode asked with great joy, "Where's Twain? You don't know?" David's eyes widened. Boss is guess. Rode couldn't help but be startled. Right at this moment, attack! With a roar, David suddenly stomped on the ground and his body moved like an arrow from the bow. In an instant, he covered a distance of several meters and slashed down with his heavy sword. A few daggers were faster than the heavy sword. David's speed was never his forte in the gray space, so after he made his move, a few ghostly figures had already pounced on him from all directions. Their attacks were all aimed at his vital point. Well, I'll kill you first. Rode instantly came back to his senses and ignored the daggers. He waved his gold and silver sword directly to meet David's heavy sword. I'm not afraid that Tangan won't show up. Bang, 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 bang. Just as those daggers were about to stab into his vitals, a battle aura armor that seemed to have materialized suddenly appeared around Rode's body. It directly bounced off the daggers, and even the first few phantoms that had rushed over were all shaken back. Then, with a bang, the gold and silver sword and the red sword collided head-on, creating a wave of air that swept out in an instant. Rode's body shook, and he looked a little surprised. David took a step back and his face turned pale, but then he stepped forward, forcibly pulled back his heavy sword, and slashed down again with a roar. Ha! The gray space is getting more and more interesting. Rode was not surprised but happy when he saw this. He laughed and didn't dodge, but also waved his sword. To be honest, Rode didn't care about these gray space members at first. After all, the absolute gap in strength was there, and he thought that he could quickly kill his opponent with his sword. But soon he found something strange. Although these people's combat energy strength was not as good as his, they were very experienced in combat and cooperated with each other very well. Basically, they would leave after one hit and never get entangled. However, their body movements were very strange, and it was impossible to kill them easily without some effort. Of course, the stranger was the big man in front of him. Even though there was a difference of an entire realm between him and Duan Ling Tian, Duan Ling Tian's strength with his heavy sword was astonishing. Duan Ling Tian didn't know if it was due to his innate strength or some other special method of exerting his strength. Even though Duan Ling Tian kept vomiting blood, Duan Ling Tian didn't seem to be at a disadvantage. Outside the circle, Michaud picked up Raymond, who was still dizzy from all the spinning, and walked over to Luke. Stop aiming. Arrows won't do much to Rode. Take him away first. Although it was not pleasant to hear, it was the truth. Arrows were undoubtedly the most powerful at close range, but the threat was reduced. After all, at close range, the opponent could predict the arrow's trajectory and dodge it first. It was not as sudden as at long range. Once the arrow was discovered, it would basically be in front of the opponent's eyes. Most people could only choose to take it head-on or be shot to death directly. So, although Rode didn't attack them and didn't seem to care, he still had the upper hand. In fact, as long as the arrow was shot, he would be able to dodge it in advance. Luke naturally understood this and knew that he was of little use here. He took Raymond and looked up at Michaud's silver mask with a complicated expression. "Long time no see. Let's find a time to treat you to a drink." Michaud shook his head. "Forget it, it's not convenient." Luke was silent when he heard that. It was indeed inconvenient. Only the members of the gray space knew that Michaud wasn't dead. The rest of them didn't know, nor could they know. Otherwise, once word got out, whether it was Josiah or the Gray Coat Army, none of them would let Michaud go. At that time, it would only be difficult for Michaud, but... Michaud smiled and patted Luke's shoulder. "Let's find a time. I'll treat you to a drink." "Haha, good idea." It would undoubtedly be much safer for Michaud to take the initiative to look for David, Luke, and the others who knew about it, and they wouldn't have to worry about the news leaking out. Time was of the essence, and now was not the time to exchange pleasantries. After giving his instructions, Michaud's figure flashed as he quickly rushed to the battlefield to help David. This wasn't considered a joint effort. Rode's strength was a level higher than theirs, and this was a natural barrier that they couldn't cross. Thus, whether it was Michaud or David, they knew that their goal was to successfully escape after Luke left with Raymond and before the pursuers arrived. There was no need for them to think about anything else. Luke was fleeing in the west. Although there was no one in the southeast, he could still leave the academy in the shortest time possible. But it was precisely because of this that if Rode insisted on chasing after them, he wouldn't be able to leave with Raymond without help. The only way to escape was to take advantage of the chaos in the west. Of course, in order to rush into the chaotic area, Luke first had to deal with how to shake off the pursuers who were getting closer and closer. "There. It's that damn archer. Let's go." The Temple Knights weren't bandits, and the pursuers naturally wouldn't chase after Luke like a swarm of bees. After a short pause, a dozen people left the group and quickly chased after Luke from one side, while the rest continued to surround the chaotic battlefield not far away. Turning around, Luke couldn't help but grin when he saw this scene. "Damn it, how dare you look down on me?" Actually, it wasn't that they were looking down on Luke. It was just that the archer class wasn't good at close combat, and Luke couldn't shoot with both hands while carrying another person. Thus, no matter how they looked at it, there were more than enough people chasing after them. But then, they realized that this wasn't the case. Luke was very fast, second only to Michaud in the gray space, but he naturally couldn't move at full speed while carrying another person. Finally, in front of a wall, two knights who arrived first blocked the arched door. Without wasting any time, two spears stabbed at Luke, who was running at high speed, one in front and one behind him. At this moment, dodging to the side was undoubtedly the best choice, but if he was late for a moment, the other knights would arrive and surround him, and it would be difficult for him to escape then. Thus, Luke didn't dodge and continued to charge straight at the spears with an indifferent expression, as if he wanted to end the battle with a dead man and a broken spear. Seeing this, the knight in front naturally wouldn't dodge. Tightening his grip on the spear, he stepped forward and shouted, "Die!" With a swoosh, the spear smoothly stabbed forward, but the figure in front of him suddenly disappeared. Looking down in shock, the knight saw that the other party was kneeling on the ground and his upper body was leaning backward. Whoosh! With a rapid friction sound, the knight used the momentum of his sprint to brush past the spear and directly below him. The next moment, the blade flashed upward. "Ah!" The knight screamed, and an arm holding the spear was flung high. Blood spurted out in an arc and wantonly splashed out. Seeing this, the knight in the back was shocked and didn't have time to think. He subconsciously stabbed downward with his spear, but it still hit nothing. The other party seemed to have expected this and jumped up first, crashing into the knight's arms. The impact of the weight of two people was naturally greater than that of one person. With a bang, the three of them flew through the arched door and landed heavily on the ground several meters away. Cough, cough. Spitting out the blood that splashed into his mouth because he couldn't dodge in time, Luke wiped his face and pulled out the dagger that was stuck in the knight's neck. With a fierce expression, he said, F***ck. I'm good at archery, but that doesn't mean I can't use a knife. Chapter 836. There were explosions near and far, flames swaying in the wind, and thick smoke billowing in all directions. Under the cover of night, the academy, which had been neat and clean during the day, was now mostly reduced to a wasteland. In the current situation, the deliberate ambush had already changed. It had become a chaotic encounter that neither the initiator nor the attacker could control. Clerics, garrison cavaliers, city guards, gangsters, gray space, and more than 1,000 students who were tied up as spectators. They were all mixed together in a mess. Even if they were enemies who hated each other deeply, they would be slightly conflicted when they ran into each other. They would be troubled as to which side they belonged to. Of course, such a chaotic environment was not all bad. At least, it was beneficial for some people. They were very familiar with the current situation. Go this way, keep walking. Lean against the wall. There's a shadow a few steps forward. Squat down, this is a blind spot. Yes, you can get up now. Walk slowly, there's no rush. Under the dim light, two figures walked quietly like ghosts. From time to time, a single person or a small group would rush past them. But a few seconds before they appeared, these two people would always be able to hide in a hiding place, either in a blind spot or separated by a wall. It was as if they could predict the future, easily passing through the chaos and clamor. This scene was indescribably strange and quiet. It was as if they were completely separated from the surrounding space and were walking in a parallel world, leisurely and leisurely. There's no rush. I thought you would be in a hurry. I was in a hurry at first. Saving people is like putting out a fire. Now we're killing people. Killing people can't be rushed. Besides, the night is still long. He raised his spear. Yes. There's someone. It's okay. It's just. Oh, they're from a gang. He waved his hand and looked thoughtfully at the fierce crowd running past not far away, especially the two familiar figures at the front. He touched his nose. They actually made it this far. That's amazing. How do you know they're not from the temple? By the way, I saw them throwing something. It looked like flour. Is it related to you? Lime powder? Haha, it's just a little thing. The people from the temple are trained. As long as there are more than 3 people, the running sounds will be more orderly, unlike the messy running of a gang. So it's you who made it. He was silent for a moment. Are you good at hiding? I'm not good at it. It's just a skill to eat. Why? Do you want to learn? Hee, I don't dare to teach you because I'm worried that I'll be the unlucky one. Haha. Tang-in. Tang-in's footsteps paused. He could sense the other party's hesitation and the emphasis in the way he addressed him. Tang-in turned to look at the other party and felt a little puzzled. Must you rebel against the temple? Sylvia had obviously thought about this for a long time. She raised her head and continued, I know that the temple has all kinds of drawbacks, and there are many ugly dark secrets. It makes sense for you to resist, but not everyone in the temple is like that. I contacted the pilgrims, and they came to the north this time. I believe that with their help, the temple will be restored to its original state. So, can you stop your resistance? Tang-in raised his eyebrows and looked at Sylvia's determined expression. Suddenly, he smiled and shook his head. I don't deny that there are good people in the temple, such as the Puritan you mentioned. But to be honest, I'm not optimistic that you can successfully restore the temple. Don't rush to refute my words. The simple facts are in front of you. If the Puritans really have a huge influence in the temple, Byron and the others would not be here. They should be on their way to the court of justice, don't you think so? Sylvia was silent. The Puritans' influence in the temple was not great. Otherwise, Byron's mentor, Archbishop Varron, would not have led the team here. See, you also know the root cause. The temple has completely decayed from the root. This is the general trend, and you can't stop it with your strength. I'm just exposing the current situation in advance. Well, let's talk as we go. To be honest, I don't like the word rebel. It should be used by you people in the temple. I'm just an outsider. I don't have such a great and glorious mission to save the temple. I prefer to overturn this statement. This is what I'm good at. After a pause, the corners of Tang Yin's mouth raised slightly, revealing a sarcastic smile. Moreover, I can't stop now, and I can't stop. You know, strictly speaking, I didn't start this. At the beginning of the year, I came back from the northern wilderness. I felt very tired, so King tired. At that time, I really wanted to live in seclusion and find a remote place, a small town or a farm. Then, I would settle down there with my beloved woman, raise cats and dogs, flowers and plants, and so on. Just thinking about it made me happy. But when I came back, I found that everything had changed. I became a wanted criminal in the whole continent, and the lives of my brothers were unknown. The Grey Coat Army was also gone. There was no way to survive at all. Taking a deep breath, Zhang Xian raised his head to look at the blazing flames in the Master-Teacher Academy. Slaughter was everywhere. Look, this is how cruel the world is. The law of the jungle doesn't change, no matter where it is. The Hall of Gods is high and mighty, and whoever they deem guilty of a crime is guilty. I'm just a small assassin. What do you think I should do? It can't be helped. I'm a person who can be persuaded by reason but not cowed by force. So I rebelled. Haha, who would have thought that I have a little talent for rebelling and made the situation like this? Now you want me to stop, but have you thought about what will happen if I stop? Will the temple let me go? Of course not, they still want to kill me. Well, actually, there's no point in saying this. It makes me feel like a wronged little wife, haha. Shaking his head and laughing, Tang Yin turned around and patted Sylvia's shoulder. He said calmly, "In the end, I'm not a good person. Whoever wants to kill me, I'll kill them. I'll kill until no one dares to kill me, or even dare to think about it. The reason is that simple. Is there anything else you want to ask? If not, well, we should kill." Not far away, the brightly lit office building, which was the command center of the temple this time, was in front of them. As soon as the two of them appeared, guards with guns looked over and surrounded them vigilantly. Sylvia looked at them in a daze. She paused and looked a little gloomy. So, you must completely overthrow the temple before you're willing to stop? Tang Yin shrugged. That's roughly what I mean. But don't think too highly of me. The Temple of Light is powerful and my ability is limited. It's hard to say to what extent I can do. Unless the Do energy circulation channel could be opened smoothly, then they could consider arm wrestling, understood. Sylvia naturally didn't know about Tang Yin's trump card. Hearing this, she took a deep breath and said firmly, "I will stop you." "I'm honored." Tang Yin's expression didn't change, but he sighed in his heart. He knew that after this, it would be difficult for the two of them to cooperate again. "Who are you?" After forming a circle, the guards shouted from a few feet away. "Isn't it obvious enough?" Tang Yin spread his hands and said seriously, "Male and female demons, stupid, Southeast. I have to say, you have indeed given me quite a pleasant surprise, but that's all. Break." With a loud roar, the gold and silver fighting radiance slapped against the four shores like a tidal wave. In an instant, the radiance radiated outwards, creating an intimidating sound. Looking around, Rode walked towards David with his sword in hand. His expression was slightly ferocious. The warm-up is over. Since Tang En has been unwilling to show up, then in order to show my gratitude for your surprise, I will go all out. David and Michaud struggled to stand up and looked at each other bitterly. They nodded and made a few gestures with their palms hidden behind their backs. This meant that they would attack again and then retreat. "Let's go!" Michaud shouted. He and the dozens of figures scattered around slapped the ground and flashed like ghosts. Right at this moment, with a bang, a large red flower pattern suddenly appeared in the distant sky. Luda's footsteps paused as he stared blankly. Suddenly, his face lit up with joy. "Haha, it's finally here! Is this the command center? Get out of here, all of you! Attack! F***ck, get out of here, let me go, attack together! I beg you, please let me go!" Chapter 837. Office Building, Command Center. A large group of people hurriedly shuttled through the corridors, shouting orders mixed with the sounds of fierce fighting. It was a clamor. The chaos had finally spread here. They have already rushed into the alert area. It is confirmed that they are Tang En and Sylvia. Their attacks are fierce. The brothers on the first floor may not be able to hold them off. They urgently need reinforcements. Order everyone in the building to rush to the stairs on the first floor. They must be blocked there by at least 5 minutes. Sir. Speak. They have already rushed to the second floor. With a loud bang, the only desk on the third floor of the dean's office collapsed. Trash. The calm voice was mixed with great anger. Rubbing his slightly trembling fist, the middle-aged commander knew that he could not count on the ordinary knights. He said in a deep voice, "How many of you are here now? Ask them to go down to the second floor to block them." "Oh right, where are the bishops? Weren't they here just now? They are great mages. Even if they don't hesitate to use their magic, they can still hold on until Sir Rode returns. Go quickly." After a moment. "Sir, the masters in charge have already rushed over, but the bishops, we can't contact them." "Why?" The middle-aged commander's eyes instantly widened. The person who gave the order pointed to the roof with a helpless expression. "They are up there, flying very high. They can't hear you." As soon as he finished speaking, boom, the desk completely collapsed and directly shattered into pieces of wood. The middle-aged commander's face was gloomy as water. His lips trembled. Pig teammates, a bunch of cowardly pigs. Of course, it was not a problem for great mages to fly at high altitude. This was their combat advantage. However, if they flew to a height where they could not even hear them, especially in such a dark night, then naturally they would not be able to see the enemy below. Hence, there was no need to talk about using magic attacks. Needless to say, Byron and the others were scared and simply hid. Taking a deep breath to suppress the anger in his heart, the middle-aged commander turned around and held onto the windowsill. He looked at the chaotic academy outside and muttered to himself, out of control, this trap plan has completely failed. Sir, let's retreat. It is not safe here." Hearing the noise getting closer and closer outside the door, someone urgently advised, "Retreat?" The middle-aged commander shook his head without hesitation and slowly drew his sword from his waist. "The team has suffered heavy casualties. If we can't kill Tang En here, our mission will be declared a failure. Let's go. Even if we die, we must hold on until Sir Rode arrives. At that time, there should be a turning point." In the corridor, Tang En and Sylvia's cooperation was still sharp and tacit. They broke into the office building and went up floor by floor. There was almost no one who could resist them. When he reached the third floor, 5 spear-wielding experts rushed over together. These experts were of similar age, all looking young. Their strength levels were also very average. They were all in the early stages of the Earth stage, and looked like they had just broken through not long ago. In fact, from them, one could get a glimpse of the terrifying background of the Temple of Light. Which other power in the Bran Empire could nurture such a young Earth-grade expert? And 5 of them at once? As if they knew Sylvia, these young men looked at her with a complicated gaze. There was regret, awe, worship, and a little bit of adoration that they didn't even notice. Sylvia didn't have any special expression. She just looked at them with a little surprise and said calmly, "You are also here." "Yes, Sir Sylvia." After a pause, the 5 people didn't use honorifics, but still respectfully replied with a salute. Tangan raised his eyebrows and looked at her. Sylvia introduced them faintly. "They are Reserve Holy Head Knight Commanders, the future pillars of the Knight's Hall." Tangan suddenly understood. He knew that the Temple of Light had a total of 12 Holy Head Knight Commanders. When these people retired or died unexpectedly, there would be substitute. For example, in the Battle of the Canyon, Tang En killed several Holy Head Knight Commanders with one shot. As a result, Owens became one of the new Holy Head Knight Commanders. Knowing this, the way these young men looked at Sylvia was easy to understand. Thinking about it, Sylvia was a famous senior in the Knight's Hall. She must have taught these people a lot. Now that they had become enemies, their thoughts were naturally complicated. However, since the battle was inevitable, the two sides naturally didn't have any thoughts of reminiscing. As the 5 people bowed apologetically, they took the lead and waved their spears. Instantly, a crisscrossing light exploded in the narrow corridor. Immediately after, the middle-aged commander personally led his men. Although it was difficult for him to intervene, he didn't hesitate to use the lives of ordinary knights to block the way. The situation was in a stalemate for a while. After fighting for a while, Tangan couldn't help but secretly nod his head. Needless to say, the ordinary knight's will to fight was commendable. But in a battle of this level, their role was limited. On the other hand, these 5 young men, although they were only reserves, whether it was in attack or defense, they were steady and experienced. What was even more commendable was that they weren't greedy. They fought steadily and had the demeanor of a master. However, Tangan waved his dagger and shook his head. "I say, if you don't harden your heart, it will be difficult to catch Byron and the others." Sylvia heard this and didn't say anything. With her and Tangan's terrifying power, even the current Holy Head Knight Commanders like Owens couldn't resist, let alone these reserves. The reason why the situation was in a stalemate was mainly because she didn't go all out. Of course, Tangan was the same. But he didn't care. Attacking the command center was only to force Road out, so everything was still up to Sylvia. After a moment, Sylvia shook her spear, and a blazing flame suddenly burst out, instantly repelling the attack. "Make your move. Try not to hurt people. I owe you a favor." "Deal." "Huh." With a long laugh, Tangan's figure flashed crazily around Sylvia. Countless layers of phantoms overlapped, and in an instant, blocked the attacks from all directions. "Don't forget, you now owe me 2 favors." Her figure flashed again, and in an instant, she rushed in front of the youth in front of her, and handed out the blood blade. "When I gather 7 and summon the dragon god, I can do whatever I want to you, right?" I'm just kidding." Dodging in a panic, she stepped on the wall of the corridor and leaped into the air, sticking close to the roof like a gecko. She avoided the crazy spear light below like a sea of fire. Damn, on purpose, definitely on purpose. With a loud bang, the walls on both sides collapsed. Xia Wei An's body followed her spear. She was like a prehistoric beast covered in magma. She rushed forward in a barbaric and unstoppable manner. Puff, puff, puff. Under such a tyrannical attack, the 3 youths who faced it directly spat out blood and flew out. The seemingly stable defense line was instantly shattered. In the end, they lacked the experience of fighting for their lives. The other 2 youths could not help but be stunned by the sudden change. And in this instant they lost the best time to rescue. With such a good opportunity, Tang En naturally had no reason to miss it. Before the youths landed on the ground, His figure suddenly flashed like a ghost, and the blood blade suddenly pressed down. Being in the air and unable to borrow strength, the three youths were shocked when they saw this. They could only shake their spears and brace themselves to meet it. Ding ding ding! Sparks appeared, and the sound of metal colliding rang out. As soon as they came into contact, the spear flowers were torn into pieces, and the blood-colored blade light instantly invaded. With a muffled groan, blood spurted out, and it was as if a huge flower of blood had bloomed out of thin air, magnificent and cruel. No! Don't you dare! Seeing this, the two youths were greatly regretful. They roared angrily, and their eyes were about to split as they waved their spears to save them. Don't be agitated, it's just a tuition fee. Tang En retreated in a flash with a playful expression. Although the scene just now looked unusually bloody, it was actually just that there were more wounds on the non-vital parts, and more blood loss. The three knights were not in any danger. Sylvia glanced at them and did not say much. She took a deep breath. That violent explosion just now was a little too much for her to bear. She then took a deep breath, straightened her body, and walked towards the stairs leading to the top floor. Whoosh! The ordinary knights in front of her were in an uproar. They subconsciously took a few steps back, looking panicked. The middle-aged commander standing in the middle of the crowd had a bitter expression. He could not understand how the 5 beginner Earth-level head knight captains were defeated so quickly. In fact, this result was inevitable. Sylvia was now at the peak of Earth level, and vaguely saw the threshold of Void level. Tang En's strength was not in the otherworldly warrior system, but judging from his previous battle record, even those who had stepped into the threshold of Void level would not have an easy time in front of him. In this way, if the two of them joined forces, how could the 5 youths who had just stepped into Earth level fight against them? Looking around and seeing the fear in their eyes, the middle-aged commander knew that the morale of his side was low. He was afraid that he could not count on them. However, as a commander, he had no choice now. He could only grit his teeth and push away the knights beside him. He wanted to create a heroic scene of dying in the line of duty to boost the morale of his side. But at this moment, there was a sudden panting sound. Huff! Make way, I'm dying from running. Those motherf asterisk curs, looting a burning house. Huff! A figure carrying a sword squeezed into the field. His hair was wet and stuck to his forehead. His clothes were torn into strips, and there were spots of blood in some places. It seemed that he was in a mess. He turned his head and looked at the 5 youths who were either standing or lying in the ruins. He shook his head in disappointment. Sigh, although I have no hope of becoming a holy head knight captain, you guys are too weak. It's normal that you can't beat them. The difference in strength is there. It's good that you didn't die. But what were you two doing at that time? Waving your spears to save them, but could you save them? Why didn't you continue to attack? That way, the sacrifice of your companions would have some value. Forget it, I don't want to talk about you guys. Where's the priest? Where the hell did he go? Hurry up and stop the bleeding. He waved his hand randomly and said a lot to himself. Then he turned his head and looked at Tang En, who was squinting his eyes. They looked at each other, sized each other up, and politely saluted. Tang En? Road. Haha, we finally meet. Thank you for showing mercy just now. He shrugged. You're welcome. You should thank Sylvia. This was her idea. Oh, we'll talk about it later. Let's get down to business first. En, I'm here to kill you this time. What a coincidence, so am I. Haha. Then what are we waiting for? I can't wait. Please. Shaking his head, Tang En calmly said, That's too vulgar. Fighting is not treating someone to a meal. There's no need to treat. Road was stunned when he heard this. Then he nodded and asked sincerely, That makes sense. Then what do you call, not vulgar? Before he finished his words, Road's body suddenly tensed up. He subconsciously stepped to the side and blocked his sword. With a ding sound, The cloth hanging on Rhodes' body slowly fell down. Tang En's ordinary face appeared behind the big sword like a phantom. He said faintly, "I think this is called not vulgar. I like it." Chapter 838. There were no good words for cursing, and no good fighters for fighting. Since both sides had the intention to kill each other, Tang En naturally didn't have the leisure to cup his hands in greeting. Taking the initiative to strike first was much more practical than any kind of demeanor. After a short moment, the battle broke out. Regardless of whether it was Tang En or Luoda, both of them were ruthless people who had experienced hundreds of battles and viewed bloody battles as nothing. Naturally, they would not have any thoughts of being careless. Pu Yi went all out from the start, and the battle entered a white-hot state from the start. Since he had the initiative, Tang En naturally wouldn't give up so easily. His figure was like a ghost without a trace, leaving only the faint sounds of his blood blade madly flashing. Like a dense net, it was truly dazzling. Rhodes' fighting style was strange. Although he had lost the initiative and was in a passive state, he wasn't in a hurry to turn the situation around. On the contrary, he was methodically attacking and defending, neither fast nor slow. It was a bit like Sylvia's fighting style, but it wasn't a good imitation, so it looked somewhat clumsy. Seeing this, the surrounding people of the shrine couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts. It must be known that apart from Byron and the others, Rhodes' strength was the highest. But now, he looked like he didn't have the strength to fight back and was half dead. It was really hard for people to have any confidence in him. However, after a short moment, everyone didn't have the heart to pay attention to this problem. Although Rhodes' attacks didn't seem to be powerful, the gold and silver light on his sword was a real and deadly thing. Therefore, when the sword light missed and collapsed the walls, instantly crushing several small groups, everyone suddenly panicked. "Retreat, quickly retreat. It's too late. Jump, everyone jump." When immortals fought, mortals suffered. Amidst the clamor, countless people jumped down from the third floor one after another like dumplings. Banging sounds rang out, and the scene was magnificent for a moment. Sylvia didn't leave, nor did she go forward to help. She still had the mission of capturing Byron alive, so she quickly walked towards the stone stairs leading to the top floor. However, when he stepped onto the first step, he still turned around to look at the intense battlefield. He looked at Rhodes thoughtfully, nodded slightly, and then shook his head. Of course, her vision was much sharper than that of those common knights. In her opinion, Rhodes, who was nicknamed Lunatic, made a rational decision this time. Tang En's movement and attack speed were beyond doubt. If Rhodes wanted to compete with Tang En in terms of speed, he would definitely have no way to survive. Owens was the clear proof of this. On the other hand, Rhodes had undoubtedly made a lot of preparations and was aware of this. That was why he changed his usual crazy tactics, discarded fancy battle techniques, and returned to the basic. It was because he did not want to let Tang En take over the rhythm. Then, he would wait for an opportunity to counterattack and make the final decision. This abacus was well thought out and could be considered a good strategy. However, Sylvia was still not optimistic about Luoda. The reason was very simple. It was because she had a similar style. In the end, she lost to Tang En. As it turned out, Sylvia's prediction was right. Instead of waiting for the opportunity to counterattack, Rhodes became more and more passive. "Fast, fast, fast, you're too fast. Look, I haven't even finished a sentence. You've already stabbed me hundreds of times." Luoda's words were intermittent. His back was against the wall, and his face was a little pale. His original cloth outfit had fallen off, and his majestic body was covered with fine cuts. Although they were not fatal, he had lost a lot of blood. He struggled to wave the gold and silver sword in his hand. His expression was both annoyed and helpless. He was annoyed because he had compromised and changed his fighting style. In the end, He was still beaten like a tortoise and could not see any hope of turning the situation around. He was helpless because this was indeed the gap in strength. He had to admit defeat. You can also attack. Try to stab me hundreds of times. The words were faint and came from all directions. Luoda could not tell where it came from. He could only see the sword light all over the sky. Haha, you're kidding. If I attack, won't I be courting death? He groaned, but there was another wound on his right chest. However, this road was kind-hearted. Although he was covered in blood, he still grinned as if he didn't care at all. Isn't it now? You've been looking for me for so long. Isn't it just to have a good fight with me? Are you willing to be suppressed by me like this, and not be able to hurt me even until you die? Tang En was now clear about Rode's strength. He was basically the same as Sylvia at the peak of Earth stage. Even if there was a gap, it would not be obvious. If such an actual combat expert blindly defended, it would not be easy for Tang En to take him down. So, if possible, it would be best to lure him out to attack. But, at least I can live a little longer, right? Tang En was silent. There was really not much to do when encountering such a mischievous person. Of course, Tang En did not think that Rode would really continue to be like this. Since the other party had adopted such a method to deal with his fighting style, he must have considered the possibility of failure. So, Tang En believed that Rode must still have a backup plan, but you're right. Rode grinned. His teeth were stained with traces of blood, strange and crazy. I'm really not resigned to hit. Suddenly, he roared. His upper body left the wall for the first time. He leaned forward and waved his sword. The fighting aura surged wildly, as if he was going to take the initiative to attack. With a swoosh, the great sword that was swinging downwards hit nothing but air. This seemingly desperate attack had actually been misjudged. In an instant, a bloody dagger appeared out of thin air. Seizing this great opportunity, it went straight for Rode's forehead. Seeing this, Rode seemed to panic. He actually raised his left arm to block. In the blink of an eye, a small stream of blood spurted out, and a piece of flesh about 3 inches long flew out. Then, with a bang, the wall suddenly burst open, sending rubble flying everywhere. Rode's figure instantly disappeared, leaving behind only a human-shaped hole in the dusty wall. The night wind slowly blew in. Tang En frowned. Although he had just dug out a piece of flesh from Rode's left arm, rather than taking advantage, it was better to say that Rode took the initiative to give it to him. From the beginning, the other party had never thought of taking the initiative to attack. The feint just now and the price he paid in the end was just to seize the moment to break the wall behind him and then successfully escape. Let's see what kind of backup plan you have. Curling his lips, Tang En stepped out of the hole and also jumped out of the building to chase down. In fact, on the surface, Rode's little scheme did not have any effect. After leaving this narrow space and going to the open field, Tang En's advantage increased a lot. Below, Rode had already adjusted his posture and landed in the open space in front of the building. Without hesitation, he rolled out. The next moment, Tang En, who was carrying countless rubble, fell down with a loud bang. Without any pause, he quickly chased after Rode like an arrow. I don't want to fight anymore. I admit that you are better than me, but in a one-on-one fight, I am not your opponent. While rolling, Rode shouted. Tang En's expression did not change at all when he heard the words. Although this road was really interesting, Tang En naturally would not stop. After a short moment, he caught up with Rode and stabbed him. Fuck! Rode slapped the ground and avoided the attack. Then he forcibly twisted his waist and waved his sword to clear the surrounding safe area. He shouted angrily, "Little bastards, what are you waiting for? Come and help me!" Tang En's figure suddenly stopped, retracted the dagger in front of him, frowned and turned sideways. A long spear of battle light instantly passed through the place where he had just stood. Then he flashed several times in a row, retreated 3 feet away like a ghost and stood upright. Looking around, Tang En found that the surrounding area was empty. Several knights who had just jumped down from the building had disappeared, as if they had been ordered to leave. Now, a few feet away from him, there were 5 figures holding spears in a circle. They were the 5 young men from before. Among them, the 3 young men's faces were obviously paler, but the bleeding wounds caused by Tang En's dagger had been treated well, and there were basically no scars or marks. Withdrawing his gaze, Tang En looked at the gray cloth that Rode found from somewhere and bandaged the wound on his left arm. He shook his head slightly. "This is your backup plan?" "Just one of them." Rode gritted his teeth and tied the gray cloth with a dead knot. His voice was a little vague. "Just now was just a warm-up, and also to test your quality." "You really didn't disappoint me, haha. Then, it's time for the main course. I have prepared a total of 3 big meals for you. It's very troublesome. How about it, is it enough?" "It's okay." Tang En nodded expressionlessly and looked at the 5 young men. "But if they are all like this, I'm afraid your efforts will be in vain. Don't be angry, he is trying to provoke you. Learn from him," Tang En said out loud. He waved his hand at the 5 young men, as if to suppress the anger in their hearts. Then he looked at Tang En and said casually, "I'm sorry, they are all rookies. But don't underestimate these rookies. Under the guidance of an old bird like me, they will definitely give you an unexpected surprise." "Is that so?" Tang En said non-committally. Then his figure flashed, and he instantly came in front of the young man in front of him, followed by a faint blade light. The young man had already experienced the terrifying speed of Tang En before, so he did not dare to be negligent. Seeing that Tang En was coming, he did not dare to meet him head-on, and retreated again and again. Tang En stepped forward to chase, but the spears on his left and right suddenly stabbed at the same time. The target was a foot in front of Tang En, and it seemed that they were only there to intercept and not attack. Seeing this, Tang En hurriedly stopped and changed direction, going around the left. But at this moment, another spear of combat aura blocked his way. He paused and looked at it for a moment, and 2 spears came from the back and the right side to block him. Tang En raised his eyebrows and tried to take a few more steps. He found that no matter where he went, there was a long spear that followed him like a shadow, blocking his way. Then, several other long spears stabbed at him at the same time, blocking his other escape routes. It was just blocking and intercepting, and at the same time providing defense to each other, but there was no attack. It gave people the feeling that these spears had been predetermined. And what these 5 young men had to do was to swing the spears according to this trajectory. Although it seemed to be somewhat rigid and dull, after a short moment, Tang En felt as if he had walked into a quagmire. The 5 spears that did not seem to be a threat cleverly cut through the surrounding space, restricting the speed and space he was most adept at, ultimately making it difficult for him to move an inch. At this time, Rode, as the only attacker, raised his gold and silver sword high in the periphery, ready to attack. Chapter 839. Interesting. As the surrounding space was rapidly compressed and cut, Tang En also carefully observed the spear array. He couldn't help but be secretly amazed. This was a perfect combination spear array. Everyone in the array had their own roles and cooperated with each other. Although on the surface, it didn't seem to have any attack power and seemed to be of little value. But in fact, the purpose of this spear array wasn't to hurt people, but to trap people, especially those who were very fast. So if he didn't guess wrong, this spear array should be specifically targeted at him. And to mobilize 5 Earth Stage early stage experts to practice just to limit his speed, this move could be said to be painstaking. How is it? Are you satisfied with this meal? Holding the gold and silver sword high, Luda's face was full of satisfaction of a successful calculation. He grinned and said, "Haha, let me introduce, this meal is called cheetah." Note, these 2 words have to be read separately. Cheetah is the word for hunting, and leopard is the word for leopard. Your speed is really too fast, just like a leopard, so I spent a lot of effort to invite a few array masters to tailor this spear array for you. Then I transferred these 5 rookies and trained them well, just to pause for a while. With a whoosh, the gold and silver sword suddenly came out of the sword and passed through the narrow gap deliberately left by the 2 young men. It quickly slashed toward Tang En, who was trapped by the 5 spears in a radius of less than 2 feet. Obviously, this was an attack that had been planned for a long time. Waiting for the spear array to succeed in trapping people, the surrounding sword light slashed down like thunder, intending to end the battle with one strike. But right at this moment Twain moved. His figure swayed like a willow in the wind, and he moved left and right in the space of a few meters. In an instant, he'd changed directions countless times and pulled out layer upon layer of afterimages, causing it to be dazzling. In the next moment, the gold and silver sword light passed through the spear array and continued to fly into the distant night sky. And Tang En still stood in the same place, looking calm, as if nothing had happened just now. His clothes were undamaged. Luda was startled, then he raised his thumb and praised sincerely, "Amazing! You can play tricks in such a small place, this movement is simply amazing. But, how long can you last?" After a moment of silence, Tang En dodged the restraints of the spear array. Suddenly, he raised his head and said, "That sword beam just now, cut down vertically." Rhodes stared blankly for a moment before shrugging indifferently. "Why do you care what method I use to release the sword rays?" He waved his hand and interrupted. "No, you can only stand on the periphery and slash the sword light vertically, right?" The corners of Tang En's mouth rose slightly. Looking at Rhodes' slightly changed expression, he continued, "Your spear array is indeed not bad, especially in terms of trapping people. However, this comes at the cost of sacrificing your attack. Don't be in a hurry to refute. If you're not convinced, then take 2 steps. Do you dare to participate in this spear array? Or do you dare to slash across a large area?" The corner of Rhodes' mouth twitched a few times. He narrowed his eyes and no longer looked relaxed. That was the truth. The spear formation walked a deformed path. It could only trap people and could not attack. And as the only attacker, although he was strong enough, he could only stand on the periphery and release sword rays. There was no other way. There was a big difference in length and usage between a big sword and a long spear. If he participated, then this tacit understanding of the spear array would be destroyed. Moreover, when he attacked, he could only slash the sword rays vertically. Because if he slashed across a large area, the first unlucky ones would be these 5 young men. Then let's just wait like this. Since the flaw had been seen, Rhodes simply smiled and said, "Yes, you're right. But you're still trapped in this spear array, aren't you? I can't cut you with 1 sword, I can't cut you with 10 swords, but I don't believe that I can't kill you with 100 swords. Tang En also chuckled a few times and shook his head. "Your spear array is indeed a bit interesting. That's why I'm interested in staying here to study it. That barrier, do you really think it can trap me?" As soon as his voice fell, Tang En's figure suddenly swayed slightly, and his phantom image appeared again. Seeing this, Rhodes' expression changed and he shouted anxiously, "Lock him!" In an instant, 5 long spears pierced from all angles, intersecting with each other, and in an instant cleverly formed a steel cage. But at this time, Tang En, who was supposed to be locked inside, was nowhere to be seen. The 5 young men stared blankly at the empty spear cage. They didn't understand what had happened and were stunned on the spot for a while. At this time, "Be careful!" As soon as the warning sounded, "Kacha, kacha," there was a muffled scream, and the knight on the right seemed to be suddenly lifted from the back. His toes were off the ground, and he was lifted 3 inches into the air. Then, his right arm holding the spear was touched by a palm that suddenly appeared behind him. It was twisted and bent, and the sound of bones breaking was dense. Obviously, it was crippled. You're still so arrogant after paying the tuition, you need to be taught a lesson. Twain's figure appeared behind the knight. He curled his lips, and with a clean chop of his hand, he knocked out the knight, who was struggling and trembling like a fish out of water, and casually threw him aside. He just promised Sylvia not to kill. Since these guys didn't know what was good for them, they couldn't blame him for being ruthless and directly crippling them. Stop. Don't attack. Luda was the first to discover that Tang En had left the spear array, but after all, he was on the periphery and was a step slower. When he arrived, Tang En had already crippled the knight, so he could only helplessly appease the other 4 young men. Squinting at Tang En, he suddenly clapped his hands and laughed. I didn't expect this to not be able to trap you, admirable, admirable. However, from the beginning to the end, the only ability you showed was speed. Shaking his head, Luda's expression was full of regret. This makes me very disappointed. It should be said that Luda's previous idea was still good, but he still underestimated Tang En's speed. As a result, the spear array that he painstakingly created was directly broken by Tang En with absolute speed, so naturally, he was very unwilling. However, Tang En naturally wouldn't complain about the loser, so he shrugged. Then I'm sorry. I don't have any other ability, but I'm fast, what should I do? As soon as these annoying words fell, Tang En's ears suddenly twitched, and he raised his head to look at the roof of the office building. There, a familiar figure was throwing something, and several battle aura spears rose into the sky like arrows leaving the bowstring, emitting ear-piercing whistles. And higher up, there were several faint holy lights. Needless to say, this was Sylvia learning from his previous method, wanting to directly shoot down Byron and the others in the sky. But it didn't seem to be effective. After all, Byron and the others were already prepared, so they just needed to avoid the spears in time. Shaking his head, Tang En withdrew his gaze and looked at Luda again. He was unwilling to argue with him, so he stepped forward and was about to directly attack. However, Luda seemed to be familiar with Tang En's style, instantly retreated a few steps, and quickly took out a yellow crystal ball about the size of a fist from his arms. You're fast. Then I'll break your legs. Luda lightly clapped his hands, and with a buzzing sound, the yellow light suddenly brightened, and waves of invisible spatial ripples spread out. Stopping, Tang En frowned and looked down, only to see countless yellow lines crisscrossing on the stone floor under his feet, like the complex roots of an ancient tree, spreading out in a large area in an instant. Among them, there were also some mysterious runes that he couldn't understand. As soon as they appeared, they fell into the ground and disappeared in an instant. What is this? Tang En didn't know much about things in the field of magic, so he was somewhat baffled. Just as he was puzzled, his body suddenly sank, as if there was 1,000 gene boulder on his back, or as if there was a big iron ball under his feet, making him feel extremely awkward. How do you feel? Luda looked at the frowning Tang En with a smile, and raised the yellow crystal ball in his hand. This thing is called the Embrace of the Earth Goddess. It's definitely a good thing. There are only a few of them in the whole temple, and it's also the second feast I've specially prepared for you. You should know that the goddess doesn't easily hug people, because mortals don't have the fortune to enjoy it. Tang En naturally didn't have the time to listen to this boring sigh. He was guessing the function of the mysterious runes in his heart, and his body slightly shook. With a loud bang, less than 10 feet away, Tang En's figure appeared again, and his foot crushed a stone floor, and the pressure on his body increased again. Luda laughed wildly. Don't struggle. I think you now know the function of this thing. That's right, as long as it's within the range of its coverage, nothing can escape from the shackles of the earth. The faster the speed, the more serious the backlash. Didn't you boast that you're fast? Try running 2 laps if you have the ability. Luda straightened his body. The first feast restricted my movement, and the second feast restricted my speed. It seems that you're really well prepared. Since he had confirmed the function of this thing, Tang En certainly wouldn't stupidly speed up. He narrowed his long and narrow eyes. Well, I'm looking forward to the third feast now. Why don't you take it out together? Good spirit. But Luda raised his thumb again and gave a cheap compliment, but then shook his head. No, I can't control the third feast. Even if I kill you, it won't give me any sense of accomplishment, so it's better to taste it one by one. Understood. Tang En nodded expressionlessly. Then come on, I'm in a hurry. While talking, the four young men had quietly dispersed, and now they were slowly surrounding from all directions with long spears in their hands. Luda put the yellow crystal ball into his arms, and then replaced the position of the young man who was knocked out, and walked steadily. Whether it was these young men or Luda, they were not warriors who were good at speed. Therefore, although they were also affected by this embrace of the Earth Goddess, their combat effectiveness was not weakened much. On the other hand, Twain was different. Speed had always been his trump card. Now that he had suffered such a huge injury that seemed to have directly broken his legs, it naturally caused his combat strength to be severely weakened. But even so, Luda and others didn't dare to neglect, and they still slowly and cautiously pressed forward. Tang En stood still, without any extra expression on his face, as if he intended to deal with all changes by remaining unchanged. However, thinking of Tang En's habit of taking the initiative in every battle, it seemed that he was very helpless about the current situation. Chapter 840. With a distance of 10 feet, he could attack with a single step. Perhaps it was because of the embrace of Goddess Gaia or some other reason, but the surrounding air seemed to have turned into a thick oil soup, making it difficult to breathe. Luda suddenly stopped and raised his eyes slightly, indicating the four youths to stop for the time being. Then, he looked at Tang En with narrowed eyes. You are very calm. Of course. You have a backup plan. Of course. The same words, but the atmosphere became more serious. Only this time, the corners of Tang En's mouth curved slightly. Why don't you tell me? Luda's eyes were a little erratic, as if he was impatient. It's okay, but, haha. Tang En suddenly chuckled twice, easing the atmosphere. Then, he shook his head and looked at Luda with a faint smile. There's no need. They won't understand. Rookies. Luda sighed helplessly and glanced at the four inexplicable youths with resentment in his eyes. Earlier, he had taken the opportunity to sneak and attack. Later, he had repeatedly emphasized his words to remind them, but none of them understood. He was a little hurt for a while. He waved his hand dispiritedly. Forget it, just come, kill. Of course, there was nothing sudden about it. Luda took a step forward, and the golden and silver fighting lights wrapped tightly around his big sword. Then, he slashed it down. There was no reason for the four youths not to understand such an obvious attack signal. They waved their spears and stabbed at him. This joint attack was no longer a spear array, nor was it to trap him. It was purely a combination of numbers and pressure. They intended to crush him in one wave. However, Tang En narrowed his long and narrow eyes. He took a step to the right with a calm expression, and avoided two spears that were stabbing at his heart. He raised his right hand and the dagger flipped out. With a ding sound, he blocked the spear between his eyebrows. Then, he retracted his right leg and his left hand stroked and pushed forward. The first two spears that had not been retracted in time were pushed forward again, and coincidentally met with Luda's big sword. With a bang, the fighting lights collided, and both sides took a step back. It was complicated to say, but in fact, it was just a matter of a moment. Twain's series of movements were not swift, but they were all under the eyes of Rode and the others. They could see the flow of his movements clearly. But right after that, everyone noticed to their astonishment that their first round of attacks had actually been dealt with so easily. Moreover, their opponent had merely taken a step forward before withdrawing a single step with an indifferent expression. Luda opened his mouth, but quickly regained his senses and fiercely shouted. Again. After thinking for a while, he added, "In order!" The great sword and spear were once again thrust out, but this time it was not like a swarm of bees. The scene just now was really strange. Rode thought that there was a problem with the way he attacked. After all, although the swarm attack was powerful, it was easy to dodge. So this time, he changed to attacking one after another. Tang Yin's expression didn't change. He just waved his hand, and the spear that was coming from the left was caught in his palm. It didn't move at all. The divine light covering the spear had not yet erupted, but it was directly separated by the thin blood light in his palm. Seeing that his companion's attack was ineffective, the young man on the right hurriedly waved his spear and swept it directly at Tang Yin's knee. This was to regain face for the previous round of attacks. The young man didn't believe that Tang Yin could still stand in place so steadily under such a large-scale attack. But then, his eyes suddenly blurred, and with a bang, the spear was firmly stepped on under his feet. How could it be? Seeing this, the young man was suddenly stunned. He couldn't react in time, and his body also leaned forward along with the spear that suddenly fell. As if he had expected this, Tang Yin took a step back again, and at the same time, stretched out his right hand, as if he was politely supporting him. "Let go." The other two young men naturally didn't dare to let their companion fall into Tang Yin's hands. One of them stabbed his companion's arm, and the other stabbed his back, intending to make it difficult for Tang Yin to take care of both sides. But the moment before they stabbed their spears, Tang Yin withdrew his right leg before it touched the ground. He took a step to avoid the attack, and then calmly waved his left hand. The young man whose spear was caught only felt a strong force suddenly hit him. He couldn't help but take a step forward, and watched his spear stab his companion's heart on the right side. He cried out in alarm. Ah! All the movements happened in a flash, just like a drama that had already been written and was being performed step by step. Fortunately, at this time, Rode, who had been observing from the side and didn't attack, stretched out his greatsword in time. With a clang, poof, the spear was raised, avoiding the heart, and stabbed into the left shoulder of the young man on the right. Suddenly, blood gushed out. What the hell kind of attack is this? Rhodes was dumbfounded. That Twain had clearly not swung his saber. He had merely waved his hand and stepped forward, calmly dodging. Not only had he caused their efforts to be in vain, he had even injured one of their own. Rhodes faintly felt that he had made an extremely stupid decision earlier. Before he could figure it out, the four young men couldn't stand it anymore. Of course, anyone who had the strength of an early-stage Earth stage but was toyed with in the palm of the opponent's hand would not feel good. Roaring in unison, the youths, who felt that their dignity had been greatly humiliated, no longer cared about Rhodes' orders. They stared fixedly at Twain's figure that was inches away from them, their eyes crimson red, as they madly brandished their spears and attacked. Seeing this, Rhodes sighed secretly, suppressed the uneasiness in his heart, and also joined in with his sword. In any case, he was an Earth stage warrior, and he was at the peak of the Earth stage. Under the all-out attack of Rode and the others, Tang Yin also lost his previous calm and free appearance. His figure drifted between the spears and swords, and was on the verge of collapse. From time to time, blood stains and fragments of clothes could be seen floating out. He was like a small boat in the stormy sea, about to be submerged in the next moment, but in fact Tang Yin's figure was always there. Even if there was no ghostly body movement, no wind-like speed, no storm of blood-colored blade light. But in this inadvertent moment, no matter how many sword shadows there were, no matter how many spears there were, no matter how many unparalleled combat skills there were, he would come and go as he pleased, unmoving. What can you do to me? On the other hand, Rode and the others were all injured, with varying degrees, and looked very embarrassed. And what was worse was that their injuries were not all caused by Tang Yin. In fact, most of them were caused by their own people. It was really depressing, and what was even more depressing was not this, but the crazy attacks they racked their brains for were all easily dodged by the slippery Tang En. Just a little bit more. Just a little bit more every time. If their attacks could be faster, if their companions could cooperate more tacitly, then Tang En would definitely be lying down. But the fact was that no matter how hard they worked and how they cooperated, they were still a little bit less. Therefore, Tang En was still alive and kicking, full of vitality. No, there must be something wrong. The few young people were still crazy about the hope that was within reach. But Rode, who had the nickname of Madman, was the first to calm down. He slightly slowed down his sword attack, squinted his eyes, and looked at all of Tang En's movements, thinking about what was wrong. With this look, Rode's eyes instantly became sluggish. He stared blankly at the floor under Tang En's feet, and unconsciously swallowed a mouthful of saliva. The floor was made of bluestone, less than 3 feet in length and width. Now, it was covered with a thin layer of lime, which rose slightly under the dazzling footsteps. Well, this was not the main point. The main point was that except for this 3 feet stone slab, there were no other marks on the surrounding stone slabs. What did this mean? This meant that under their crazy attacks just now, Tang En had never left the 3 feet range of his original position. So close, yet so far. So close, yet so far. Rode finally understood where the uneasiness in his heart came from. Tang En's ghostly body movements and wind-like speed were actually a cover, or it could be said that they were not all of his abilities. What the opponent was really good at was actually close combat, which was almost invincible in a small area. The 2 meals he had prepared before seemed to have tied the opponent's hands and feet, but in fact, he had stepped into the opponent's field of expertise. So, how could he gain any advantage? Ha ha! Smiling bitterly, Rode looked at Tang En with a complicated expression and licked his lips. I have a question. Since you have this ability, why didn't you directly break the spear array before? This was indeed something that Rode could not figure out. With Twain's terrifying close combat ability, the seemingly perfect spear array from before should not have been able to trap him at all. He should have been able to break it at will. Tang En glanced at Rode while dodging, and was somewhat impressed. To be able to see the problem in such a short time, this Rode was indeed not simple. But then, he curled his lips and said as a matter of course, why should I break it? Don't you think it's easier and more convenient to rely on speed to get away? That makes sense. Chapter 841. That makes sense. Stunned, Rode nodded in agreement. That was the reason. You can't just cast a broken fishing net and let the fish tear the net with their small teeth instead of easily escaping from the big hole on the side. Even if you want to show off your domineering aura, this is not the right way to do it. Just as Rode was shocked by Twain's powerful close combat ability, the situation on the battlefield suddenly changed. Originally, the encirclement attack was already difficult to deal with. Now that Rode had unconsciously stopped attacking, the 4 youths, who were only relying on their momentary bravery, naturally could not surround Twain. Break! With a low shout, the rainstorm of blood blades suddenly burst out. The 4 spears swung out at the same time, and the 2 youths who were too close to the front vomited blood and flew back. Without taking advantage of the situation to pursue, Tang En stepped forward quickly without hesitation. For the first time, he left the 3 feet stone slab under his feet and went straight to Rode. Tang En knew very well that although the 4 youths were good and might even have great achievements in the future, but right now, the only one who could pose a threat to him was Rode. In an instant, Rode's expression changed. He also knew that he had made a low-level mistake. He retreated again, and the gold and silver fighting light on the big sword burst out violently without any scruples. It slashed horizontally and instantly covered a large area around him. and this forced choice also made the other two youths, who were ready to rescue, have no choice but to retreat. Ding ding ding. In the narrow space, the sound of metal colliding suddenly sounded. Tang En attacked like the wind, and the shadows of the dagger were heavy. He kept hitting the gold and silver big sword from all angles. Sparks flew everywhere, and the momentum was terrifying. In a short time, the big sword in front of Tang En moved a little, and a gap was bitten in the solid defense line. The opportunity was fleeting. Twain raised his left hand, which seemed to be slow but was actually fast, and slapped it through the gap. Rode was surprised when he saw this, and then his heart calmed down. It was just a slap. As long as it was not a dagger, he could bear it. Thinking of this, he roared, and the fighting energy armor flashed around his body again. Then, he no longer paid attention to the palm and focused most of his energy on controlling the big sword. It had to be said that Rhodes' choice in an instant was good. But in the next moment, he completely regretted it. Bang, crash. The yellow light shone brightly, and the crisp sound of glass shattering could be heard. It was as though a crystal glass had fallen to the ground. Then, it was as if time had stopped for a moment. No matter if it was Tang En, Rode, or the four young men at the periphery, all sorts of crisscrossed lines and profound talisman markings appeared before their eyes, and then they successively collapsed, split apart, and dissipated in the air. It was an extremely bizarre scene. This phenomenon only lasted for an instant, and then everyone felt their bodies lighten. Their breathing suddenly became extremely smooth. Rode opened his mouth and lowered his head to look at the shattered crystal ball that fell from his tattered underwear. His expression instantly turned ugly. That palm. How was it meant to attack? It was clearly meant to shatter Gaia's embrace. It's all over now, just as Rode expected. Tang En, who was relieved of his burden, was undoubtedly even more powerful. He let out a long laugh, and his figure flashed wildly like a ghost. Countless blood blades instantly attacked from all directions. At such a close distance, there was simply no time to dodge, and there was no time to block. Fuck! Rode also knew that it was a moment of life and death. He suddenly raised his head, flung his hair, pursed his lips, and let out a shrill cry that shook the sky for several miles. Then, he didn't care about how many of the countless blood blades were real and how many were fake. He still waved his sword wildly, and stepped forward with a ferocious expression. He actually wanted to fight head-on with his life. Crazy people do crazy things on their own. Tang En had the absolute advantage. Naturally, there was no reason for him to be afraid of the other party at this time. The blood blades didn't retreat, and his figure didn't retreat. He just crazily collided head-on like this. In an instant, the crisp sound of weapons clashing, the sound of blades piercing into flesh, and the dull explosion under the collision of fighting light. The large bluestone slabs within a radius of several hundred feet suddenly jumped up by themselves, and were immediately divided into countless crisscrossed light rays in the air, and shattered into pieces. It was so terrifying. The two young men not far away saw this, and their faces were immediately filled with fear. They didn't have time to pay attention to Rode, and fled in a sorry state under the falling stones. They didn't dare to look back. And at this time, the terrifying battle behind them was actually immediately decided. Ah! A hoarse and miserable howl sounded, and a figure flew out like a cannonball dripping blood. Following that, an arm that was tightly holding a large sword appeared. It spun and flew and was thrown far away. With a bang, the figure fell to the ground and smashed the stone slabs. It was Rode. But now, he no longer had the elegant demeanor of a peak Earth-grade expert. His majestic body was covered with numerous scars. The small ones were bloody holes, and the large ones were bloody wounds that were more than a few inches long. The most serious one was his right arm that was cut off at the shoulder, and the white bones were ghastly. Overall, it looked like an inferior toy that had been ravaged countless times and had been thoroughly played with. But his luck was still not bad. The Do-Chi armor that he had casually added before had saved his life. Although his heart, neck, and other vital parts were covered with wounds, the depth was not enough to be fatal. Of course, it was only to save his life. Now that he had completely lost the ability to fight, it was just a matter of adding another stab. But after struggling to sit up, Rhodes suddenly laughed. He spat out blood and grinned happily. "Ha ha, cough cough. Do you know what that long howl means? Cough cough. You don't know, huff. The third meal. You're dead." In the intermittent voice, Tang En steadily stepped out of the dust. There were only minor injuries on his body, and there was nothing serious. Only his face was unusually pale. This was not caused by the life and death battle with Rhodes just now, but because of the previous close combat. Rhodes' guess was right. Tang En was best at precise control over a small area. And in this way, it was naturally impossible for his close combat ability not to be strong. But to calculate and predict the attack trajectory of a large sword and 4 spears, the dodging route, and so on, Tang En's energy consumption was huge. On the outside, his face was as pale as a sheet of paper. It was precisely because of this that Tang En naturally had no time to talk nonsense with Rhodes. Most of the words of a loser were just to maintain their dignity. There was no need to listen to them. He took a deep breath and moved his feet, ready to rush over and kill Rhodes. But at this moment, suddenly, boom! It was as if thunder had exploded directly in his ears, and the momentum was shocking. Tang En subconsciously turned his head, and saw that the roof of the office building not far away had completely turned into a sea of fire. It was as if more than a dozen explosive crystals had detonated at the same time. The stone slabs collapsed and fell, and the building shook left and right. The next moment, a shadow shrouded, and the entire building collapsed in this direction, a loud noise that shook the sky. The ground trembled slightly, and dust filled the sky. Startled, the billowing air turned into a blade-like wind and hit Tang En head-on. The tattered cloth on his clothes suddenly flew back and danced endlessly. Then, as far as his eyes could see, a black shadow suddenly rushed out of the dust, just avoiding the range of the collapse of the building, and came to a safe open space. Cough cough. As soon as she stopped, she kept coughing, and her face was covered in black dust. Who else could it be but Sylvia? What's the situation? Tang En naturally didn't think that such a big movement in front of him was caused by Sylvia's anger because she couldn't defeat Byron and the others. Sylvia didn't answer. She raised her head and looked at the billowing dust on the ruins of the building, and her expression was extremely dignified. Tang En followed her gaze and narrowed his eyes. His body suddenly shook. A large amount of dust floated in the air, covering the sky and the moon. But there was an area that was extremely eye-catching, like a passage. The dust didn't enter, and one could clearly see the gloomy night sky and sparse stars behind it. At this time, in the passage, a figure wearing a white robe could be faintly seen strolling. There wasn't any trace of fighting light or magic in the surroundings. It seemed ordinary, but looking at the casual and natural posture of walking in the void, one could see that this ordinary was actually the biggest abnormality. With such an oppressive aura, such a strange appearance, and the terrifying sea of fire on the roof earlier, this person's identity was naturally clear as day. Licking his dry lips, Twain couldn't help but mutter in a low voice, as if he was talking in his sleep, "Archmage. This is the third feast?" Pause for a while. Tang En quickly suppressed the shock in his heart and suddenly turned to look at the half-dead Rhodes, his eyes sharp. No matter who came, the people who should be killed must be killed. Seemingly aware of Tang En's intention, Rhodes grinned and said with a smile, "Ha, I said. I can't control the third meal, and you can't resist it either, huff." Gasping for breath, he pointed upwards, "You're on your own." Looking up, another tall and sturdy figure holding a spear slowly descended from the gloomy clouds above Rhodes' head. Before he even got close, his overwhelming pressure had already pressed down, causing one to be unable to summon any thoughts of resistance. A void-level warrior. Damn it. Touching his nose, Tang Yan's face was bitter. He looked up to the sky and sighed, "Alas, I already knew that you want to kill me, but you think too highly of me." Chapter 842. From top to bottom, the Dochi system was divided into martial saint, heaven level, void level, earth level. Earth level was a watershed. After that, there was a big bottleneck. Generally speaking, after reaching earth level, one was qualified to be recognized as a master. Of course, there were many kinds of masters. Reaching the martial saint level was the real saint standing at the peak of the world. Looking down on all living things like ants, everything was ordinary. Not close to nobles, not interested in fame and wealth. He had become a leader in his own corner. But from the word of mouth, there were no saints in the world. And not to mention reaching the martial saint level, even heaven-level warriors were extremely rare. They could be counted with one's fingers. They were as rare as phoenix feathers and unicorn horns. So excluding these two, those who really stepped into void level, as long as they appeared in the world, they basically represented invincibility. The situation of magicians was more or less the same. From top to bottom, they were Saint Magus, Great Magus, Magus, Great Magus, and so on. Among them, Great Magus was the watershed. A little different was that the cultivation of magic was more difficult than Do-Chi. So don't look at those magicians who could easily live for hundreds of years. Age was not the standard to measure strength. There were also many people who could not break through to become a great magus after living for hundreds of years. So if one had the cultivation of magus, they were basically the same as void-level warriors. They were basically invincible in the world. And in this humble and mediocre city, in the new civilian academy, Tang Yan could not imagine that he would face two invincible masters at once. Magus and void-level warriors were both here. For this situation, Tang Yan really did not know what to say. Did he underestimate his strength? Or did the temple overestimate his threat level? Wasn't this the rhythm of forcing people to die? After a few breaths, the white-robed magus and the burly void-level warrior came to the open space above. They did not land on the ground. They just quietly hovered in the void, looking down indifferently. There was no need to make any noise. The overwhelming, terrifying pressure had already filled every corner of the square. In the quiet twilight, the night wind was slightly cold. Just like Tang Yan and Sylvia's current state of mind, secretly feeling cold. After a while, Sylvia took a deep breath and quickly regained her composure. When she was tailing Rhodes' group earlier, she vaguely sensed a terrifying force following them. However, he didn't expect this terrifying power to far exceed his expectations. She bowed with her spear and said respectfully, "Sylvia greets Archmage Cecily and Lord Brock. You are no longer a disciple of the temple, so you don't have to call me Lord." It was the white-robed Grand Magus called Cecily. Cecily's voice was somewhat cold. Sylvia's expression darkened when she heard this. Her lips moved slightly as if she wanted to explain something, but in the end, she only pursed her lips stubbornly. "Leave this place, Vivian. This time I can pretend that I didn't see you." The burly old man named Brock seemed to be familiar with Sylvia and called her by her nickname. Although there was no expression on his face, his tone was gentle. "Don't let down your teacher, Rooster." Tang Yan naturally knew who Rooster was. He was a retired Holy Head Knight commander and also Xiao Weion's spear teacher. In the Battle of the North Temple headquarters, the master and disciple fought, but in the end, he was defeated by Sylvia's spear. Since Brock was willing to accept Rooster's favor, they should be good friends. Looking at his burly figure and the way he held a spear, Tang Yan secretly nodded and guessed that this should also be a retired Holy Head Knight. However, unlike Rooster, Brock's strength was higher, and his physical condition was also very good. His combat power was not much weaker than when he was at his peak. It was just that he didn't know whether his current cultivation was at the early stage of the void realm. Or was it middle or high level? Just as Tang En was secretly speculating, Sylvia bowed again with gratitude. "Thank you, Lord." Before her voice fell, "No, absolutely not." Byron and the others shouted anxiously. They were timid and afraid of death before, so they flew very high and wished that they could directly drill into the clouds. Now that they saw strong reinforcements coming to help, they immediately became spirited and quickly gathered around. It must be said that although Byron and the others were much weaker than Brock, their positions were not low, and they were the kind that held real power, so they naturally didn't need to worry too much. Hearing that Brock intended to let Sylvia go, they immediately refuted. "Lord Brock, this Sylvia has already betrayed the temple, and now she is together with the source of the chaos in the temple, Tang En. It can be seen that she has completely fallen into evil heresy. In this case, according to the doctrine, she should be killed on the spot." "Yes, Lord, you can't be merciful to this evil heresy. If you don't kill her today, there will be endless trouble in the future." These bishops hated Sylvia's previous backstabbing behavior to the extreme. Now that they had the opportunity, they naturally didn't want to let go of the opportunity to kill Sylvia. After a while, they wanted Brock and the others to directly kill Sylvia on the spot. At that moment, a sudden roar sounded. "Shut the F***ck up! Cough, cough!" Holding his chest and coughing repeatedly, Rode lifted his pale face and snarled ferociously. "I, the captain, am still alive. Since when is it your turn to chirp here? If you continue to be so noisy, I will personally send you to the gallows of the trial court when I return. Are you dissatisfied? Speak up if you're dissatisfied." The earth-shattering roar startled Brock and the others, and they looked at Rode with strange gazes. In this way, it was needless to say how Byron and the others felt mentally. Their faces were ashen, and they trembled as they pointed downward, almost suffocating from anger. But looking at Rode's crazy appearance, they couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts. In the end, they didn't dare to open their mouths to speak. They had no choice. Before their crimes were cleared, they couldn't afford to offend this lunatic. Seeing that he had shaken the scene, Rode snorted and gasped for breath again. Then, he waved to Brock and the others and said, "Greetings, Lord Byron and Lord Byron. I'm injured and can't salute you. Yes, we can put the matter of Sylvia aside for the time being. Let's get rid of this person first." Paused for a while and pointed at Tang En. The latter touched his nose with an innocent expression. After hesitating for a moment, he said solemnly, "This person's close combat ability is very, very strong, so strong that it's boundless. So if it's not necessary, Lord Byron and Lord Byron, it's best not to let him get close to you, and don't take the initiative to approach him." Cough, cough, damn it. The corner of Tang En's mouth twitched, and his expression was a little ugly. He took a completely different path from the otherworldly warriors. Even if he had the strength comparable to the void stage, he still couldn't walk in the air. So when Tang En fought with powerhouses who could fly before, he would first find ways to close the distance between them, and then quickly drag the other party into his battle rhythm. With his violent close combat ability, he would kill the other party in one breath before they had the chance to fly. But if the other party stayed in the air like this and didn't come down, how could he fight? Of course, although he was depressed, Tang En still heard some useful information from Rode's malicious words. Brock's strength wasn't terrifying to the extreme. He should be in the early stages of the void stage, or at most, in the middle stages. Otherwise, Rode wouldn't have given such a solemn explanation. It was obvious that he lacked confidence. What Tang En could hear, Brock and Lord Byron certainly could too. But after all, they hadn't experienced Rode's shock, so they naturally wouldn't care too much. Brock frowned when he heard this. He glanced at Tang En with some vigilance in his eyes. This was the unique attitude of someone who had experienced hundreds of battles. Of course, most of them were still disapproving, After all, he was just an Earth stage warrior who couldn't fly. How strong could he be? As for Cecily, he was completely indifferent. This was not entirely out of contempt, but because of his status, it was impossible for him to take the initiative to get close to Twain. Have you ever seen a mage engage in close combat with a warrior during a battle? Everyone's thoughts raced when they heard this. Only Xiao Weian, who was neither servile nor overbearing, continued to speak after everyone had quieted down. Thank you for your kind intentions, sir. Please also express my apologies to Master Russ, because his student will once again betray his painstaking kindness. Taking a deep breath, Sylvia raised her head under Brock's frowning gaze. Her face was as firm as ever. She waved her spear at Byron and the others and said resolutely, "Right and wrong, there is justice. I'm here this time to capture them and go to the headquarters court together for investigation and trial to distinguish right from wrong. So before this goal is achieved, I will never leave." Byron and the others couldn't help but change their expressions when they heard this. They averted their eyes, not daring to meet the pair of pure white eyes below, because they were burning like flames. Brock was startled, then sighed softly. "Why bother? Since you don't want to leave, then stay." Cecily glanced at Xiao Weian with an indifferent expression. Then, as if he was a little impatient, he waved the staff in his hand, and a large amount of magic elements rapidly gathered in the air. Chapter 843. A Magister's attack was indeed extraordinary. There was no need for cumbersome incantations. With a simple wave of his staff, the surrounding explosive elements immediately surged and gathered crazily. Raging flames burned out of thin air, instantly forming a large red and black magma fireball. Of course, a Magister was also a mage. Their professional identity meant that their attacks would never be as fast as a warrior's. The one who attacked was Sylvia. Since she had already made her stance clear and let Cecily make the first move, it was natural for her to make a move at this time. As for Tang En, he was rubbing his chin and looking up at the group of people in the sky, as bored as a passerby. Then he retracted his gaze and looked at Sylvia, who was ready to attack. He nodded with a gratified expression, almost applauding and cheering her on. He looked like a rascal who was hugging her thigh. At this time, Sylvia naturally had no time to pay attention to these. With a roar, she stepped forward and slowly and solemnly pushed out a blazing spear like an overlord lifting a cauldron. Whoosh! A flaming spear light quickly broke through the air, shining dazzlingly. In an instant it cut through the dark night sky and stabbed straight at Cecily behind the magma fireball. Seeing this, Brock did not make any movements in the distance. He knew that this was just a warm-up tentative attack, and could not hurt each other at all. Of course, even if it was just a warm-up, the probing strength of a Magister was not something an Earth-rank warrior could compare to. The battle aura spear whistled first, but it suddenly stopped 3 feet in front of Cecily. A pale-colored barrier intercepted it like a natural moat. No matter how fast the flaming spear spun and attacked, it still could not move an inch forward. At this time, there was a long howl. Explode! With a boom, the flaming spear light exploded. A large ball of dazzling white light suddenly shone in the sky, illuminating every corner of the academy below. The scene was spectacular. Whoosh! Under the rolling waves of air, the white robe fluttered without wind. Cecily, who was caught off guard, floated back a foot like a rootless duckweed. Although he was not injured, the mountains and rivers between his brows were slightly furrowed, faintly showing displeasure. With a light snort, he coldly waved his staff. The suspended burning magma fireball dragged out a flame afterimage and crashed down like a meteorite falling to the ground. In the end, he was still an archmage. The spells he cast were all high-leveled area of effect magic, directly enveloping the area Tang En and Sylvia were in. Sylvia's position was slightly outside, and she had already dodged to the side, so it shouldn't be a problem for her to leave the area of effect. On the other hand, Tang En was like a country boy who had never seen magic before. He stared at the magma fireball that was getting closer and closer with a serious expression on his face. In the next instant, an enormous bang resounded out abruptly as the magma fireball smashed straight down, causing the ground to tremble as numerous flames and shattered stone slabs sprayed out in all directions, causing the spectators to be unable to refrain from shuddering. Moreover, this was only the effect of an instantaneous collision. After smashing a large hole in the scorched earth, the magma fireball immediately exploded. It was as if fatal magma was flowing out of it, spreading continuously in all directions. The sound was terrifying. At this moment, Brock's gaze focused as he scanned the plaza in confusion. Other than Sylvia, who escaped safely, Tang En's figure had actually disappeared. Not only had he disappeared from sight, but he had also disappeared from perception. How was this possible? As a genuine void stage warrior, after seeing the enemy, it basically meant that he had successfully locked onto the other party's aura. However, after the magma fireball exploded in an instant just now, this locked aura had disappeared from Brock's perception on the ground. F***CK. Protect me. Although the half-dead Road did not know where Tang En was, he was certain that the other party would not be killed so easily by a magic attack. So after being stunned for a moment, his expression suddenly changed. He raised his head and roared, "His target is me!" As soon as his voice fell, Tang En appeared behind Road like a ghost. He raised his eyebrows in surprise and stabbed down with his dagger. Perhaps, as Road had said before, he was indeed a little similar to Tang En in some aspects. For example, his sinister thoughts, his wretched style. So, in the midst of everyone's doubts, only he had pointed out Tang En's true purpose. "How dare you?" Brock, who was hovering above Road, was furious when he saw this. He originally thought that it would be a smooth battle without any suspense. He did not expect that at this time, the other party actually wanted to kill under his nose. What kind of provocation and insult was this? Without thinking, he opened his mouth and roared angrily, swinging his spear down. This spear did not contain much fighting light. Its power seemed ordinary, but it seemed to have pierced through space directly. In a short breath, it came to the top of Tang En's head and pierced straight down with a strong wind. This was the so-called besieging way to rescue Zhao. If Tang En insisted on killing Road, he would be nailed to the ground by the spear after he succeeded. Even so, Road did not dare to be the slightest bit careless. He was really afraid of Tang En's abnormal speed, so after shouting, he instantly lay down and raised his one arm high to cover his face. This posture looked a bit wretched and clumsy, and it was meaningless. How could his palm block a sharp dagger? But what he wanted was not to block, but to delay the dagger, even if it was only for a moment. Tang En smiled, an admiring smile. The dagger in his right hand magically disappeared and turned into a thumbs-up gesture. Then, his figure flashed, and he quickly retreated. Tang En was not sure if he could avoid the sharp spear behind him after killing Road, who was on guard. So as long as he did not want to die together with this half-crippled person, he naturally had to retreat. He retreated 10 feet away and came to the edge of the scorched earth pit. Sylvia, who was not far away, looked over, pursed her lips, and smiled. "You also have times when your assassination fails?" "Occasionally there will always be." Shrugging, Tang En looked at the two masters in the air indifferently, touched his nose and sighed. "It's hard to deal with. You know their strength, right?" Sylvia nodded lightly. Sir Brock's strength was at the beginning of the void stage when he retired. Not long after that, he entered the intermediate stage. Since then, he has not been able to break through and improve. Now, well, his real strength should be at the beginning of the void stage, maybe even higher. Tang En nodded slightly when he heard this. This was normal. After all, he had not been on the battlefield for a long time and was already old. It was unrealistic to want to exert all the theoretical strength. Of course, his realm was there after all, so he could not be underestimated. As for Sir Cecily, mages are only divided into realms, not levels, so I only know that he is a mage. Of course, no matter how high or low he is, to deal with us, it is enough to deal with me. At this point, Sylvia's mouth showed a self-deprecating smile, and she turned to look at Tang En. With your speed, I thought you would choose to run away without hesitation. Sylvia was naturally clear about Tang En's ability. If he wanted to run, Brock and the other two might not be able to stop him. As for herself, there was no way she could run away anyway. It could be said that when she expressed her position just now, it was actually to block her own escape route. Hee, I wanted to, but I couldn't bear to part with you. Squinting his eyes, Tang En was muttering to himself as he habitually spoke nonsense. He was hesitant, which was rare. Sylvia's delicate body stiffened when she heard this, but she eased up in an instant. Her expression was cold and embarrassed. She unconsciously tucked a few strands of long hair in front of her forehead behind her ears. Then you can die first. This feminine signature move was paired with an extremely strong posture. It was contradictory yet harmonious, faintly forming a different kind of charm, wild and gentle beauty. Unfortunately, Tang En did not see or hear it. Looking at the two people in the sky, Brock and the other one who were about to attack again, he muttered to himself, "How can I completely anger them? Anger?" Stunned, Sylvia looked at the obviously absent-minded Tang En and could not help but show some unconsciously annoyed. She said harshly, "Aren't you very good at scolding people? Try scolding them or cut off one of their hands. Well, if you can get close." Tang En was surprised. Although he vaguely felt that Sylvia's mood was a little strange, he did not think too much about it. He touched his chin and shook his head. "No, scolding people is about exposing their shortcomings, but I'm not familiar with them, so I can't do it at all. Cut off their hands, how is this possible? Cut off their hands." He seemed to have thought of something and muttered repeatedly with a thoughtful expression. However, at this time, Sylvia was already nervous. Brock slowly descended from above. The fighting light on his long spear flickered and was about to attack at any time. "It's coming, Wei Wei. And don't call me by my nickname. Don't mind these details. How about I give you a gift? I don't need." Even though the atmosphere was as cold as ice, Sylvia could not help but be startled when she heard this. She turned her head in shock. Gift? Are you kidding? Keep it. Although it's a little bloody, I don't often give gifts to others. Hide." Sylvia was at a loss. Suddenly, her vision blurred. Her shoulders were lifted by Tang En and they ran quickly. In a breath, they ran for hundreds of feet. The sound of the wind whistled in their ears. In the distance, an extremely pure and holy spear light fell like a comet and directly hit the place where they were standing just now. The soil and stones splashed in the violent explosion. A clear voice continued to speak in their ears. "Since this is your idea, then I'll give you a palm. Well, if I'm lucky, I'll try to get you a gem. Haha, don't all women like this? What kind of nonsense is this? Don't worry, I'll do what I say. But for this gift, you have to cooperate with me a little." He whispered a few more words. At this time, the two had rushed to the edge of the square. Tang En released his palm, patted the shoulder of the stunned Sylvia, and said solemnly, "It's all up to you." "It's all up to me? What are you talking about?" Before Sylvia fully woke up, Tang En flashed away again. After stepping into the square for more than 10 feet, he stopped, raised his head and pointed, and roared, "Old bastard! Do you dare to come down and fight with me alone? Fight with me, fight with me." The roar came out from afar and kept echoing in the square for a long time. The momentum was majestic. Byron and others who were watching the show suddenly froze when they heard this. They looked at Tang En below in a daze, and then looked at Brock, who was pointed at. They were stunned, and a great feeling of absurdity quickly rose from the bottom of their hearts. They almost laughed out loud. Fight with a void-level martial artist alone? Haha, this guy's head wasn't squeezed by the door, right? Even seeking death is so cool. Brock, who was watched by everyone, twitched the corner of his mouth, and his expression was a little absent-minded for a moment. After so many years, he didn't expect that someone would challenge him directly, and an Earth-level martial artist. He shook his head slightly and looked down at the clamoring Tang En, as if he was looking at a clown. He curled his lips and said, "Ridiculous!" As soon as he finished speaking, he swung his spear. Dozens of auras appeared out of thin air, and fell one after another according to a certain pattern, instantly covering a large area. "Haha, you still don't dare!" With a long laugh, Twain's figure flashed on the ground like a ghost, stopping and changing directions. After drawing a few strange arcs, he instantly left the area covered by the spear aura. He stopped and waved his hand. With a whoosh, a blood-red sword went against the sky and went straight to Cecily. This was the sword that Rode had previously cut off with his arm. It was unknown when it was in Tang En's hand and was thrown out as a hidden weapon. "Why don't you take him with you?" "Haha, I don't mind." The sword once again stopped 10 feet in front of Cecily, but this time it was firm. It forcibly advanced 1 foot in the light-colored barrier until the blood-red light on the sword disappeared, and then it fell down powerlessly. The power of blood energy after layers of special effects was no joke. Not to mention other things for the time being, just in terms of penetrating power alone, it was no pressure to completely destroy the same level of fighting power in another world. Of course, this was not the main point now. Everyone, including Cecily, did not pay attention to this. They just looked at Tang En, who was once again clamoring below, and were silent for a moment. Silence not only meant tacit agreement, but also meant speechlessness. For example, this guy who was talking nonsense and wanted to challenge a magister and a void-level martial artist at the same time really made people speechless from the bottom of their hearts. What should they say about him? Well, there was no need to doubt. This guy's head was indeed squeezed by a door. After a moment. "Haha, interesting. Very interesting." Although he was laughing, the smile hanging on the corner of Cecily's mouth was cold. He looked down indifferently, his gaze merciless. "You want to fight with us on the ground, close combat?" Perhaps because he had already been angered once, Brock seemed calmer this time and had the leisure to analyze the intention of Tang En's move. Yes. With no intention of hiding anything, Tang En admitted it openly with a face full of smiles. He raised his head, and his expression was extremely serious. "I'm really good at close combat. Fighting 10 of you is no problem at all. How about it, do you want to try?" As soon as he finished speaking, haha, Long Sky laughed. When Byron and the others heard the words, "fighting 10 people like you," they really could not help but feel ridiculous in their hearts. They laughed loudly and could not stop at all. Rode was the only one who did not smile. On the contrary, his brows were gradually frowning, and his expression became more and more dignified. Although he had only fought with Tang En once and did not have any secret dealings with him, Rode was now afraid of Tang En. But Roder was now extremely fearful of Twain. It was an unreasonable fear. He knew how ruthless Twain was, and such a person would not do meaningless things. There must be a reason for him to talk nonsense now. Was he trying to provoke him? No, Brock was not a group of pigs like Byron. He had experienced hundreds of battles. How could he give up his advantage, just because of a few words from the other party, and take risks foolishly? Tang En should also be very clear about this. So what was the reason? Rubbing his eyebrows, Rode, who was puzzled, inadvertently raised his head. His line of sight crossed the scorched pit, crossed Tang En, and went all the way to the edge of the square. His gaze suddenly froze. Under the dark night, there was a blurry figure in an extremely awkward and strange posture. The body leaned forward, kneeling on one knee. Both hands were placed on the shoulders, holding the end of the spear tightly. The curve of the whole body was extremely exaggerated and full of tension. It was like a horse pulling a carriage, or an old ox plowing the land, squeezing out every trace of strength in the body with all its might in order to erupt with violent brute force in an instant. Sylvia? What is she doing? Luodo was stunned for a moment, but the banter on the side continued. Brock stopped smiling and shook his head helplessly. To be honest, I admire your confidence, although I don't know where it comes from, sassily interrupted. After killing you later, I will order someone to cut open your heart and carefully find the source of this arrogant confidence. After a pause, Brock shook his head and laughed. He slowly raised his spear, and the fighting light was faintly visible. That's it. The farce should be over now. As Rode expected, Brock did not fall for Tang En's scheme at all. He did not even explain. He did not need to explain at all. Not to mention that in his eyes, Tang En was not qualified. Even if he was an opponent he admired very much, he had no reason to give up his natural advantage and stand on the same starting line as his opponent in order to seek so-called fairness. This was not fairness but stupidity. Tang En did not look disappointed when he heard this. He jumped a few times on the spot, raised the dark dagger in his hand at Brock and grinned. Do you believe it? The next moment it will blind your dog eyes. Haha. The corners of Brock's mouth were slightly dry, and he chuckled silently. He had lost the interest to speak again, and was about to wave his spear down. But at this moment, his expression suddenly froze, and his gaze swept back and forth below. That Tang En actually disappeared under his nose again? What the hell is going on? Understood, I understand. Be careful. Just as Brock was wondering if Tang En had disappeared again, a shrill warning suddenly resounded through the night sky. Rode leaned forward and stared at the edge of the square with a horrified expression. It was still there. Sylvia's awkward and strange posture that she had maintained for a long time was instantly released. A large area of the floor beside her suddenly collapsed. She stomped on the ground, lowered her arms and shrugged her shoulders. The spear behind her suddenly swung forward, drawing an ear-piercing whistle in the short distance. And at this moment, Tang En, who had just disappeared, stood on the tip of the spear like a ghost. Go! With an extremely sharp and deformed roar, Sylvia's figure was completely stretched out. Her resolute face was a little distorted, and drops of sweat were densely scattered around like raindrops. There was no fighting energy, no skill. This was an absolute explosion of pure strength. In this world, Xia Weian was probably the only one who could unleash such an unreasonable attack. In the next moment, Tang En was directly sent into the sky by the overbearing power on the spear. Behind him, the spear that could not be retracted at all smashed into the ground in front of Sylvia. Boom! Sylvia's figure was thrown out by the rebound force at the first moment. Even she could not control the power that had accumulated to the extreme. The ground below was once again ruthlessly ravaged, and a large area collapsed like an earthquake. Feeling the tremor of the ground below, Rode's body was also trembling. He really understood. The reason why Tang En spoke so arrogantly just now was to attract the attention of everyone present. And in fact, he did do it, so Sylvia had been quietly accumulating power on the side until now. Until the explosion, no one noticed. He had fooled everyone. Looking up and looking at Tang En, who was directly in front of Brock, Rode's expression could not help but be in a trance. Close combat. This is the close combat you've been asking for. But can close combat in the sky and on the ground be the same? Tang En did not consider Rode's question, at least not now. He was feeling the speed and passion brought about by the extreme wind speed. He was so excited that he almost could not control himself, until Brock's stupefied face appeared in his line of sight. He stretched out his hand and waved the dagger, and the bloody light instantly erupted. Brock did not know whether it was because he could not believe his eyes or because of the bloody light of the blade, but he subconsciously looked away. He laughed wildly. "Ha ha! I told you, it will blind your dog eyes." Chapter 844. Ha ha! I told you, it will blind your dog eyes. Tang En's wretched scheme, coupled with Sylvia's unsolvable violence, finally sent the blood-light dagger to an unreachable height in one fell swoop. At this time, arrogant! The roar shook the air, and Brock was finally furious. His face was gloomy as he swung his spear. In the whistling sound, the tip of the spear immediately collided with the dagger. There was a loud explosion in the air, and bursts of invisible space ripples rippled out in an instant. Tang En only felt numbness in his upper and lower teeth. He completely lost all feeling, as if they would all fall off in the next moment. He couldn't help but raise his head and open his mouth, spitting out a large amount of blood mist. In the air, there was no way to borrow strength. Therefore, Tang En couldn't dodge this spear. He could only grit his teeth and endure it. Fortunately, the dagger that Lena quietly forged was strong enough to withstand the test, and there was no tragedy of the dagger breaking and dying at the beginning. Fortunately, Tang En's surging blood and chi, coupled with Sylvia's overbearing pure strength, even Brock, a void-level martial artist, did not have the slightest advantage in this terrifying joint attack. The long spear swung out, and his body involuntarily floated back 10 feet. Although he spat out blood and his rapid upward momentum was blocked, Tang En did not fall because of this. Instead, because of the moment of subtle balance formed by the violent impact, his body was also suspended in midair. Tang En's body movement was so outstanding that he couldn't care less about his injuries. Grabbing this momentary balance, he twisted his waist and straightened his abdomen, as if he had completed the movement of a carp in the air. His body abruptly rose 10 feet, and he once again came in front of Brock and stabbed with the dagger. Gutsy! Gutsy! Of course, Brock could see the beauty of this action. At the same time, he also knew that Tang En's move was to send himself to an absolutely dangerous situation where he would either live or die. At such a height, he couldn't fly in the air. As long as he fell, there was no way he could survive. Of course, appreciation was appreciation. Looking at Tang En, who was standing straight with him, Brock, who was already angry, looked calm and pitiful. He straightened his spear and stabbed out. Go down! There was no need for exquisite spear techniques or much battle chi. Brock believed that as long as he forced the other party away, this Tang En would fall directly because he had no support point. In the end, without a void-level cultivation base, how could someone like him come to the sky? Although his life was hanging by a thread, Tang En didn't show the slightest panic on his face. On the contrary, he grinned and said, "Ha ha, thank you." His upper body slightly swayed to dodge, and he stretched out his hand to lightly press on the spear body. His figure actually flashed again like a ghost, arriving behind Brock. In an instant, blood-colored blade lights that were as dense as the stars in the sky exploded with a loud bang. Killing intent filled the air, directly enveloping the surrounding area. How is this possible? Brock was shocked when he saw this. Then, his rich experience on the battlefield made him subconsciously move his palm forward, grab the middle of the spear, and turn around to counterattack. The natural length of the spear was not suitable for close combat. Therefore, although Brock grabbed the middle of the spear and used it as a long sword, it was inevitable that it would be a little awkward. Therefore, the situation was suppressed for a while. Oh no, he still used his close combat ability. Rhodes' heart sank when he saw this, and he secretly cursed. At the same time, he couldn't help but be full of doubts. Strange, how did he stay in the air? Void battle? Void battle. Void level. He is a void level warrior. The thoughts of Byron and the others were much simpler. They lowered their heads and looked at Twain, who was engaged in a fierce battle with Brock in the air. Twain was rolling and rolling, but he did not fall. They immediately thought of this terrifying possibility, and could not help but scream. "Shut up! What are you panicking for?" Cecily shouted unhappily, and then looked down at Tang En, who was fading in and out. After carefully observing, his eyebrows suddenly raised. "No, there's a problem. Bullshit void level." Compared to everyone's doubts and guesses, Brock, who was in the middle of it, had gradually recovered from the shock, and his expression became extremely ugly. Others might not understand, but he was naturally very clear. This Tang En didn't have the ability to fight in the void. The reason why he didn't fall now was entirely because of him. Waving the dagger to collide with the spear, gently pressing the spear with his hand, and punching and kicking at close range. All kinds of seemingly inadvertent small movements were actually borrowing a small amount of strength from him to stand in the air and tangle with him. Borrowing strength. Realizing this, other than being extremely angry, Brock could not help but feel great waves in his heart. He was extremely shocked. Rhodes' words that he didn't care much about before also echoed clearly in his ears at this time. This person's close combat ability is very strong and boundless. So if it's not necessary, it's best not to let him get close. Damn, he's really boundless. Taking a deep breath, Brock narrowed his eyes and looked at Tang En, who was flashing around like a ghost, and a determined look flashed in his eyes. "I have to admit that you have indeed brought me a lot of surprises and trouble. I have fought in this way for most of my life, and this is the first time I have seen it. But let's end it here." His gaze sharpened. Roar! Suddenly raising his head and roaring, Brock suddenly withdrew his spear momentum. In an instant, the blood-colored blade light that filled the sky directly invaded. Poof! Tang En's figure appeared in front of Brock. The dagger in his hand pierced through the battle energy armor and pierced into the right side of his chest. Blood immediately gushed out. However, Brock didn't seem to feel it. His vulture eyes and Tang En looked at each other, and his chest suddenly rose and fell. Pure and holy battle energy surged out of his body, instantly illuminating the dark night sky and Tang En's somewhat pale face. He opened his hands wide, and the battle energy was like a raging tide, slapping in all directions. Get lost! At such a close distance, Tang En couldn't avoid it. He just adjusted his position slightly, and his body seemed to be hit head-on by a galloping horse. With a bang, he jumped high into the boundless night sky and flew out while vomiting blood. "It's over. What a pity." Rhodes shook his head slightly with a look of regret on his face. If they were on the ground, with this Tang En's close combat ability, as long as he entered his battle rhythm, it was unlikely that he would give others a chance to erupt their battle energy. But this was the sky after all. While attacking, he had to borrow strength. It was inevitable that he would be careless. This also gave Brock the opportunity to risk injury and send him flying with all his strength. What a pity! It's rare to meet such an interesting opponent. He didn't die in my hands, but he fell to his death. He laughed loudly. Haha, he's dead now. Needless to say, he's going to be smashed into meat paste. This is what happens when you go against the Divine Palace. Haha. Ha. Unlike Rhodes' somewhat regretful attitude, Byron and the others who knew the details from Cecily were ecstatic when they saw Tang En being blasted out like a cannonball without any possibility of survival. They were relieved and couldn't help but laugh at him. They finally vented the stuffiness that had been in their chests for a long time. Phew! We've finally eradicated this disaster. We can also go back in peace. Wait. Why is he coming toward us? Previously, Brock had lowered his altitude a little in order to attack, so Cecily, Byron, and the others were higher in the air. Now, with the uncertain questioning of a bishop, everyone lowered their heads in shock. Only then did they realize that Tang En, who had been sent flying, was actually coming toward them. It's a coincidence, right? He shouldn't have been able to reach us before falling down. But this speed, it doesn't seem right, idiot. Attack quickly. While they were puzzled and guessing, Brock, who was below, was livid. He flew over and roared with thunder. His expression was both angry and anxious. Brock couldn't be blamed for being like this. This was because when Tang En burst out his combat energy, he had curled up into a ball and jumped up on the spot. Previously, he had wondered what the purpose of this action was. Now, seeing Tang En flying quickly towards Cecily and the others, how could he not understand? The best close combat opponent for a warrior was, of course, a mage. In other words, this guy's target from the beginning was not him. He had become a springboard for nothing, and he had successfully borrowed his strength to send him directly up. F***ck. Haha, it's too late. With a long laugh, Tang En's curled-up body spun and stretched in the air. He directly came to the sight of the stunned Byron and the others. At this time, his facial features were bleeding, and his body was covered in blood. He looked like a vicious ghost that had just climbed up from the abyss of hell. He grinned, and traces of blood hung from his teeth. Hee, let's see where you can hide. Chapter 845. Everyone would more or less have nightmares that they did not want to recall. To Byron and the others, watching in fear as more than half of the northern shrine collapsed, watching in anger as countless believers rioted, and fearfully waiting for the judgment court's noose to descend upon their necks were undoubtedly nightmares that they didn't want to think about recently. But now, looking at this ordinary young man who looked like a ferocious ghost and smiled like a devil, they realized that everything was clear. They suddenly realized that those were just trivial matters. It was this person who had single-handedly created all the nightmares they had mentioned above. It was also this person who had been causing trouble for them at all times, cutting off their future and directly threatening their lives. It turned out that he was the biggest nightmare. Of course, only Byron and the others had these feelings. Cecily did not have them. He frowned as he looked at Tang En, who was charging towards him. He only felt that this hothead had brought a little too much trouble. He did not like these troubles, so he waved his hand indifferently. The huge magic crystal at the top of his magic staff instantly bloomed with brilliant light. Then, rays of light swords appeared out of thin air around his body. They spun densely, like stars surrounding the moon. The scene was dreamy and magnificent. He raised his staff. Go! Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Countless spinning rays of light shot out at the same time. It was as if a Milky Way was hanging upside down in the sky. Old bastard! Tang En, who had his back facing him, did not need to look back to know who had launched this attack. He took a few steps in the air and suddenly reached out his hand to slap Byron's magic shield, who was closest to him. With a bang, the shield vibrated. With this force, Tang En regained control of his body. He shook slightly, and when he appeared again, he was already standing on the magic shield of another bishop not far away. At the same time, Byron was also awakened by this slap. Before he could scream in horror, his vision was filled with countless rays of light that were rapidly shooting towards him. He opened his mouth and stood dumbfounded on the spot. Fortunately, with Cecily's exquisite mastery of magic, he naturally would not make a mistake like killing each other. He frowned slightly and moved his magic staff. Turn. Countless rays of light drew a beautiful arc in front of Byron and quickly changed direction, once again chasing after Tang En. Although the sword light was fast, Tang En's speed was not slow either. Without waiting for the sword to reach him, his figure flashed again and landed precisely on the head of another bishop. He gestured with his hand and laughed, "Haha, come on, come on." Cecily's old face instantly darkened. He waved his staff repeatedly, and countless sword gleams immediately scattered into several small galaxies, circling and chasing after the enemy. sealing off the surrounding area in an instant. However, at this time, Tang En was playing a game of trampling on living people in the air. He did not care about the sword light at all. His body flashed like a ghost, and he kept appearing and disappearing above the heads of 4 or 5 bishops. No matter how fast the sword light was, it had to be controlled by a person. Therefore, if one wanted to attack successfully, one must first react quickly. However, in front of Tang En's dizzying and abnormal speed, Seisoli's reaction could not keep up at all. Therefore, even though he had several galaxies in his hands, he could only return empty-handed. Even Tang En's figure would occasionally appear on the elemental sword light, walking calmly and arrogantly. Perhaps it was because he was in the mood to play. Long laughter came from all directions in the air. It was erratic and very joyful. This scene made everyone present dumbfounded. One must know that they were in the air, and Tang En did not have the ability to fly. In other words, if he made a mistake in his choice of position, or if he went overboard, the result would be meat paste without any suspense. But even in such a situation, he was still trying to attract hatred. Sylvia, who was looking up from below, had the corners of her eyes twitching. She was clear about Tang En's ability. Otherwise, she would not have agreed to that seemingly ridiculous idea just now. However, knowing was one thing, actually seeing it was another. Looking at Tang En's dangerous and flirtatious dance in the air, she unconsciously stroked her left chest. Her heart was beating faster and faster below. She shook her head and sighed. This guy is really playing like this. In the distance, Rode was also watching in a daze. After a while, he lowered his head, exhaled a turbid breath, and muttered to himself, "This is AF * King Lunatic." For Rode to admit that he was a lunatic, there was no doubt that he was crazy to a certain extent. At this time, Seisoli, who was at the center of it all, also showed signs of going crazy. His gloomy face looked like it could drip water directly. Finally, after another failed attack, he could not help but roar, "Are you all dead? What are you standing there for? Get out of my sight!" This sentence was naturally directed at Byron and the others. No matter how fast Tang En was, he still needed a springboard. If they had not stood there foolishly and allowed him to step on them, not to mention being so arrogant, Tang En would not even have a foothold and would have fallen long ago. And it was precisely because of these people that some of Seisoli's large-scale and powerful spells could not be cast at all. It could be said that Byron and the others had become useless teammates again this time. Yes. Byron and the others finally came back to their senses and couldn't help but curse Seisoli in their hearts. It was clearly his fault, yet he still had the cheek to blame them. What bullsh *t archmage. Of course, on the surface, they still nodded repeatedly in agreement and waved their staffs to leave. But in the next moment, a pale barrier suddenly appeared 10 feet in front of Seisoli. At the same time, Tang En's figure appeared, brandishing his dagger as he advanced. At this time, he no longer had the playful look from before, and his face was solemn. Break. On the dagger, a bloody glow shone brightly. The icy killing intent that carried the bitter smell of blood instantly dropped the temperature of the surrounding area to the freezing point. Although the pale barrier that blocked Sylvia's spear and Tang En's sword slightly slowed down Tang En's advancing speed, it could not stop Tang En's indomitable momentum of thunder and was about to collapse. At this time, the countless sword rays were still circling above Byron and the others in the distance. His target is me? Seisoli suddenly came to a realization, and then an uncontrollable anger quickly rose from the bottom of his heart. This feeling was similar to a lion being poked in the face and provoked by a sheep. There was some disdain, but more of it was the monstrous anger of having his authority belittled. Good. Since you're courting death, I'll fulfill your wish. Seisoli gnashed his teeth and waved his magic wand with a twisted face. While Tang En was breaking through, he calmly put on a magic shield for himself. The pale barrier was only an external defensive shield. The magic shield that could really block damage was of course the magic shield. Putting on a magic shield before a battle was also the first iron rule that all mages had to bear in their hearts after becoming a mage. The moment the magic shield was released, the pale barrier collapsed completely like a stream of water. Tang En charged directly to the front of the magic shield with the remaining momentum of his charge. Without hesitation, he stretched out his hand and brandished his dagger, stabbing it rapidly. Ha ha! Saisoli's lips curled into a disdainful smile when he saw this, and he chuckled silently. His magic shield was at the level of an archmage. Even Brock might not be able to break it in a short time, let alone a mere earth-rank warrior like you. You really don't know what you're talking about. Shaking his head slightly, Saisoli raised his arm again and waved his staff to release an offensive spell to send Tang En directly to hell. But at this moment, his arm suddenly stopped in midair, and his pupils contracted sharply. Inside the magic shield, beside the staff, the tip of an inch-long blade suddenly appeared out of thin air. The specks of blood were extremely dazzling. Then, the tip of the blade was pulled down a few inches, and like cutting cloth, it easily cut a black hole in the empty space. Then, half of a palm holding a dagger reached out from within. Outside the magic shield, half of Tang En's outstretched palm disappeared into thin air, which looked extremely strange. At this time, the magic shield at the level of an archmage that was blocking in the middle was still flickering with a faint light, and there was no reaction. What was this? Spatial magic? How could it be? In an instant, countless thoughts were spinning chaotically in Saisoli's mind. Among them, the most reliable explanation for the scene in front of him was undoubtedly spatial magic. But don't forget that Saisoli himself was a mage, and at the level of an archmage. Although he wasn't a space mage, he more or less had some knowledge in this area. How could spatial magic form a precise traverse in such a narrow distance? Even if it could, the magic shield was in the middle, and the two completely different magic elements would inevitably repel each other. How could it succeed? Moreover, a warrior knew spatial magic? All kinds of inconceivable conjectures made Saisoli instantly confused. At this time, the half of the palm that reached in turned slightly, and the dagger drew out a blood-red blade light. Then, a line of blood appeared on Saisoli's wrist. The next moment, the old palm holding the staff slipped silently. Chapter 846. Tang En was a killer. According to the terms of the other world, he was an assassin. He could not go deep alone and have the heroic and domineering aura of repelling millions of troops with one sword. That was an unparalleled warrior. He also could not strategize and summon a meteorite from 100 miles away to easily take the life of an enemy general. That was a mysterious mage. All he could do was to be invincible in one-on-one combat within 10 feet. No matter if the target was an unparalleled warrior or a mysterious mage, he would kill with every step he took and spill blood with every swing of his blade. Therefore, in a short period of time, he first played with Brock at close range and then simply cut off Saisoli's palm. The latter seemed inconceivable, but the reason was not as complicated as Saisoli thought. Tang En did not understand spatial magic, but this did not mean that he did not understand spatial magic. In fact, the general method was exactly the same as when he had previously stolen the incriminating records in the forbidden area of the Northern Temple. It was nothing more than opening up a spatial channel within a narrow distance, crossing the magic shield, and directly letting the dagger face the mage's fragile body. Of course, it was easy to say, but in reality, it was undoubtedly as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Otherwise, even an old fellow as strong as Saisoli, who had lived for hundreds of years, would not have been hit directly in a face-to-face encounter. Tang En was only constantly exploring this attack method. The spatial distance he could control now was still very limited. Otherwise, what he would have cut off now would not be a palm that was close to him, but the head behind it. But even so, this scene was enough to make everyone's brains crash again. In the blink of an eye, no one could clearly see what method Tang En had used, but Saisoli's broken palm that fell from the magic shield was clearly imprinted in everyone's line of sight. This was a magister who represented invincibility as long as he was born. He had actually handed over his own palm in just one face-to-face encounter, and the opponent was an Earth-level warrior who could not fly. For a moment, everyone felt that the world was probably a little too crazy. The 10 fingers were connected to the heart, let alone a complete palm. After a pause, a hissing scream shook the sky and wailed miserably. Saisoli's old and indifferent face was completely distorted. He had not been injured for hundreds of years and had almost forgotten this kind of heart-wrenching pain. Now, as he watched his hand slide down, his vision suddenly turned black, and he almost fainted. Twain could not help but shudder when he heard the duck-like shriek. He grimaced, but his hands were not slow. He lowered his body and grabbed the old hand that was holding the magic wand tightly. Then, he stepped on the magic shield with both feet. With a bang, he used the force to shoot out from the side like an arrow leaving the bow. Damn it! Brock, who had just arrived with a gun, was a step slower. He was unable to prevent the tragedy from happening, nor was he able to snatch the palm. His expression immediately turned ashen. One had to know that with the various healing spells of the temple, as long as the hand remained intact, there was still hope to reattach it. But now that it had fallen into the hands of the other party, how could it be so easy to get it back? He waved his spear repeatedly, and in an instant, countless violent spear lights shot out in the air. He roared ferociously, "Stay! Haha, let's go, let's go!" With a long laugh, the direction Tang En retreated in was not chosen at random. His body flipped a few times in the air, and he actually came to the nearest bishop. The latter was now staring with his eyes and mouth open, completely in a state of stupefaction. Without saying a word, Tang En directly swung his dagger down, and the blood light shone brightly again. He could not break the magic shield of a magister, but it was no problem for such a rookie expert to hold up a magic shield. After a few short breaths, with a crisp bang, the magic shield shattered like a fragile eggshell under the attack of the dense blood-colored blade lights. Putting away the dagger and grabbing the bishop's lapel, Tang En's smile was somewhat malicious. "Hee, let's go, I'll show you what speed and passion are." As soon as he finished speaking, a violent gust of wind blasted into their ears. Another shrill scream instantly pierced through the twilight night sky. Tang En and the bishop were upside down, and like comets falling to the ground, they plummeted rapidly against the biting cold wind. And at the position where they were standing just now, countless violent spear lights whizzed past, and they were one step too late again. "Where do you think you're going?" With an earth-shaking roar, Brock, who had been schemed against in succession, went completely berserk. He swung his spear, and a thick cylindrical spear light followed the falling trajectory of the two people and chased after them rapidly. In an instant, Tang En and the bishop were in front, and the cylindrical spear light was behind them. The speed of the two was almost the same, and one in front and one behind, they launched a desperate chase in the air. Sylvia, who was below, originally wanted to come to their rescue, but when she saw the situation, her expression changed. Tang En and the bishop's falling momentum was too fierce. Even if she had the intention to rescue them, the success rate was definitely not high. Coupled with the cylindrical spear light behind them, she would definitely die if she threw herself in. After hesitating for less than a second, Sylvia gritted her teeth and decided to rush to the rescue. This had nothing to do with anything else, but because the two were still in a state of cooperation, and she had never had the habit of abandoning her companions. However, after only a few steps, Sylvia's footsteps paused. In the sky, Tang En was swooping down and waving his hand at her, indicating that she should leave quickly, as far as possible. This was not sacrificing oneself for righteousness and generously dying for justice. It should be known that these righteous actions were seriously inconsistent with Tang En's style. Whoosh! Don't King scream like a ghost! In the biting cold wind, Tang En's words had just left his mouth, but they were immediately blown away. And the target of his words, which was the bishop, was still screaming hoarsely with his eyes closed, like a pig being slaughtered. He did not hear what Tang En was saying at all. *CK. Tang En looked back. In his blurred vision due to the wind blowing his tears, the extremely eye-catching cylindrical spear light behind them did not seem to have any intention of getting closer. Then, he clamped the bishop's legs and feet with his legs. With a fierce look in his eyes, he used the strength of his waist and abdomen to forcefully turn the two of them upside down. A slap was thrown. Slap! I said. Stop King screaming. The shrill screams suddenly stopped. The bishop subconsciously opened his eyes and covered his face. He looked at Tang En, who was close at hand, with a face full of horror. I know my hairstyle is very handsome now. But brother, don't look, there's no time. Stroking his broom hair, Tang En sighed helplessly and pointed at his feet. If there's no accident, about 15 seconds later, we'll fall and become a pile of shit. Don't scream. You don't want to die either, right? The bishop nodded desperately. Very good, we've reached a preliminary consensus. Patting the bishop's shoulder, Tang En's expression suddenly changed. He shouted angrily, Then why the *CK are you looking at us like a fool? Don't you know how to fly? Hurry up and cast your magic. Yes. I can fly, I can fly. He shouted in surprise. Under the fear of falling and becoming a pile of shit, the bishop's brain turned into a pile of mush. Tang En relied on the rapid changes in his expression and tone to easily control the bishop's fragile state of mind. If it was under normal circumstances, the bishop who hated Tang En to the core, although it was unlikely that he would perish together with Tang En, he would at least hesitate for a while and delay for some time. And when that time came, the outcome would be hard to say. Glancing at the ground that was getting closer and closer, Tang En's eyes twitched a few times. He raised his hand again and patted the back of the bishop's head. With a bang, he said impatiently, If you know how to fly, then fly. What are you screaming for? Yes, yes, yes. The bishop nodded submissively and freed his hands. His lips trembled as he chanted intermittently. Seeing this, Tang En was very nervous, afraid that he would suddenly lose consciousness. Fortunately, flight and magic shield were the life-saving skills of a mage. Although the bishop was abnormally terrified, he still relied on his cowardly instincts and successfully cast this magic. In an instant, Tang En felt his body suddenly become lighter, and the speed of his rapid fall was greatly reduced. But that was all, their bodies were still falling. Looking at Tang En's sharp gaze, the bishop waved his hands and explained in fear, It's not my fault, it's really not my fault. We are falling too fast, and with our weight we can't fly. But at this speed, we won't die. Hearing this, Tang En's expression relaxed. He raised his head and looked at the cylindrical spear that was suddenly approaching them. He nodded, Well, it's not your fault. He paused and looked down at the ground about 10 feet below them. He squinted his long and narrow eyes. If that's the case. At this moment, the bishop saw the cylindrical spear above his head and his face turned ashen. At this speed, they would not die. At most, they would break a leg. But with this tyrannical spear, they would definitely be dead. Then let's leave it to fate. Releasing the legs that were clamping down, Tang En reached out and pressed on the bishop's shoulders. His body rose slightly and leaned back, then he kicked out heavily on the bishop's shoulders. In an instant, screams mixed with the sound of bones breaking could be heard. 2 figures flew out, one on the left and one on the right. Whoosh! In a short moment, the huge cylindrical spear with the shadow of death pressed down rapidly, but it brushed past his body. Phew! Tang Yen heaved a sigh of relief. He raised his hand to wipe the fine beads of cold sweat on his forehead. He was still scared. As long as he avoided the spear, everything would be fine. Now, Tang Yen was only a few feet away from the ground. At this height, even with the momentum, it would not take his life. As for the bishop, well, if he was a little smarter and did not hit the ground face first, he would probably be able to survive curling up into a ball, landing on the ground, bending over, rolling. It was the standard action of unloading and buffering. Then bang bang bang. Like a speeding wheel, Tang Yen's body instantly pressed a straight line on the square. The bluestone floor behind him was constantly crumbling and debris flew everywhere. He could not stop at all. Damn it, I underestimated the momentum of this fall. As soon as he landed, Tang Yen could not help but feel that things were not going well. As he rolled rapidly, the bones all over his body crackled like beans under a stone mill, rolling over and over again. The pain in between was indescribable. Finally, after rushing out of the square and crashing into a ruined wall, Tang Yen finally stopped. Then, he turned over and spat out the blood that he had been holding in his throat for a long time. He immediately felt much better. As far as the eye could see, in the pitch-black night sky, Byron and the others were scattered far away. It was obvious that they had been traumatized by the scene just now. Cecily was still screaming miserably. Presumably, even if he could survive this time, the scene of his broken palm would accompany him for the rest of his life. Brock was patrolling both sides with his spear in hand, obviously trying to determine which one was him and which one was the bishop. The next moment, a figure quickly appeared above his line of sight. It was Xia Weian, who had rushed over, lowering her head to look at Tang Yen, who was covered in blood and grimacing in pain. Xia Weian was in a daze. He actually survived. I say, in any case, he is a comrade. Are you just going to watch and not help him? Hearing that, Sylvia was stunned. Then, she chuckled and leaned over to help Tang Yen up. Just as she was about to say something, a palm suddenly appeared in front of her. It was an old palm that was tightly holding a huge magic crystal staff. The broken part was still dripping with blood. Grinning, Tang Yen handed it over. Here, your present. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.